What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we will see, what if Naruto married a dragon? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. A mistake, just another mistake, in a long list to be sure, but a mistake of innocence, not of malice. Yet that hardly mattered in the end. For the boy that now ran through the darkening streets it mattered very little. All that mattered was to run, to keep running, hoping, praying that his pursuers would not catch up to him. What was his crime? What had he done to be now chased after by an angry mob, hell-bent on dragging him to the Shinigami himself? If their howls were any indication, his crime was what it had always been, innocence. The innocence to stop before the home he had, to look in the dust-covered windows, and to wonder why he felt drawn to it. Even as the coolness of night closed in around him, he did not find himself headed back to his lonely apartment to find what warmth he could under the covers of his bed. Why, even as the first shout reached him, he had found a strange peace in looking at the small home long since abandoned. But none of this mattered now. All that mattered was to run, to escape. Get back here, demon! How dare you vandalize the fourth's home? This festival marks your death, Kyuubi! Howled figures among the crowd, as their fellows took up the bellow, as if some greater anger drove them on, as if a hand was at work to force them after the blonde-haired youth before them. The boy did not reply to these shouts. He had long since found the price of such words, and it was pain. For every word he would speak a snarl would answer, for every truth he spoke another harsh glare, and for every innocent act, only the chase. So the young blonde ran, his bright orange clothing doing nothing to keep him hidden as his feet pounded a path into the forest, carrying him over the fence at its edge, even as a bent bit of wire caught at his pant leg, causing him to fall over, leaving a long strip hanging to wave gently in the night breeze. But the boy carried on, forcing himself forwards into the forest, ignorant to his now bleeding leg, or his torn clothing, only knowing that his only choice was to flee. Behind him the crowd reached the fence, and despite his fear the boy could hear their angry shouts. "Where is He? I don't know, spread out, he can't have gone far. Wait, look there, that's his, and look, blood." Voices called, each indistinguishable to the boy as he continued to race ahead, the last words to reach his ears being of mad laughter, and calls of their job finished. But even then the boy did not halt. No, what finally stopped the boy's feet was when the ground below him gave out, and the earth opened its mouth wide to swallow him into darkness. As the boy fell he could voice the question he had been asking ever since he had been thrown from the door of the orphanage at the tender age of 4, the question he had asked for these 3 years. Why? Before with the blow his head impacted something in the blackness and his mind followed his body into the void. It was hours later when the blonde boy found himself waking, and the first thing that came to him was the ache of his body, his head throbbing, joined by his leg a moment later as feeling slowly worked its way down his body. With a groan the boy slowly opened his sapphire eyes, blinking what he was able to identify of blood from where it had hardened over his face. However, all of this was second to what his eyes found in front of him. There, a few feet from him on the wall, there was a flame, but one unlike any he had ever seen. It was blue, radiant blue, like it was carved from ice, casting a pale light all around the room, illuminating his orange garb and pale skin with an unearthly glow. With nothing else for it, the boy pushed himself up. He noted a series of grooves that ran along the floor in an intricate pattern that's purpose escaped him. If the light had been brighter the boy would have noted the dark red liquid he had provided slowly making its way through that pattern as though its red current was being drawn by an unseen figure. Pushing himself up the blonde turned to see what else the blue flame was illuminating. As the boy made his way to his feet, he found himself standing before a massive altar that seemed to have been chiseled from blackened, almost burnt-looking stone that glowed eerily in the blue flame light, causing shadows to dance across the massive lizard-like skulls on either side of the structure. To add to the boy's fear, there were also 8 blank hooded faces carved into the altar, rising up to form rank around a final enormous skull that faced him, its hollow eyes sockets seeming to dance in the flame's light. What is the place?" the boy asked as he turned from the altar, looking around at the cavern walls, his eyes spying the place he must have fallen from, noting with a touch of horror that it was now collapsed, cutting of any escape from the room. As the boy looked on at this, he didn't notice as the red lines had reached the base of the altar, continuing up its carvings decorating the skulls and stone faces alike in glissando lines of deepest red that shimmered in the light. Just as the red lines reached the skull at the center of the altar, the blonde boy turned to see the blackened eyes of the skull glow suddenly with a red light, as it's lifted itself up, exposing an open jaw towards the blonde. Before he could do more than look over in horror, the now gaping maw let out a blast of light, illuminating the cavern as from it a stone mask, glowing brightly and shaking as though it was fighting, broke free, flying into the boy's face. As the mask and boy met, the light suddenly vanished, leaving the room suddenly barren of either the altar or the child. A few moments later, the torches on the wall with their bluish flames slowly died, plunging the chamber into complete darkness once more. This portal was closed, but it had served its purpose, and so would sleep soundly. With a flash, the boy found himself suddenly falling face first into a snowdrift, the cold biting all the way to his core. There was a bit of a reaction to this. Ah, cold, cold, cold. Ah, it's down my back. Ouch, 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 it's in my pants. Ah, who put snow in a cave? Called the surprised youth as he made a bit of a show, jumping up and running around in apparent panic, doing a bit of a dance as he attempted to work the white powder out of his clothing. As the boy performed his impromptu dance, a few voices near him let out deep belts of what sounded like amusement. Ha ha ha, Aldun, come, it seems we have visitors. Called a massive voice that seemed to shake the very air around the boy, causing him to halt his dance and turn. What met his eyes was beyond belief. There, crouched at the crest of another snow-covered bit of rock, was a massive creature. When he had only seen the like of the few times he had managed to see one of the picture books back at the orphanage, it was a dragon. Before the boy could even come to grips with the face that such a creature could exist, another of the beasts made its appearance, its black body alighting upon the snow as it turned its massive form to face the boy in apparent amusement. Yes, Parthenax, I see that. And it would seem he bears the mask of our priests. Interesting, the mask of Conoric, a lost treasure. It seems this youth has a story to tell. Alduin replied, his voice heavy as his fellow, as the pair turned their face towards the youth, who under the circumstances did the most logical thing he could. He fainted, falling back into the snowdrift behind him with a soft thump as the two dragons looked at one another in apparent confusion. I must say, for a priest, that was hardly the reaction I expected. One would think Kurai would allow such behavior. Alduin spoke, a twinge of disappointment in his words even as he turned to leave. However, before he could, his fellow noted a smell in the air that caused him to speak. Alduin, wait, do you smell it? The boy called Parthenax as he moved one clawed hand over to gently turn the boy over, showing the red stain leaking from his battered head and leg. Alduin in turn noted the sight, and more importantly to him the smell. It brought back a darker time for him. A time he had burned the fields of men black with his flame. A time he had put behind him. However, at the moment the life of the little priest took precedence over his memories. With a grunt, Alduin grabbed the boy before unfolding his massive wings. A moment later found him headed down to the temple, the small form clutch in his massive talons, as behind him Parthenax let out a small sigh as his eyes turned down the red-stained snow, and his mind turned to how a boy so injured could find his way to the top of their sanctuary. And possible, most importantly, how the lost treasure Conoric had found its way home to them. An unknown time later found the boy blinking himself back to consciousness, finding the previous cold and pain that had assaulted his body blessedly absent. As these facts were coming into focus for the youth, he noticed a small movement to his side. Turning his head upon what he noticed to be some kind of animal fur that acted as his bed, he found the profile of a woman bending over a small fire where a kettle hung, stirring the contents, the light reflecting off of the tan robes she wore. The figure seemed to notice his eyes upon her, because she turned a pair of bright green slitted eyes that carried a reptilian nature. So you are awake, that is good. The masters were worried you might have let the fever take you, spoke the woman as she stood, a bowl in her hands, as she moved over to take a seat beside the bed, never taking her eyes of the youth as she dipped a spoon into the bowl. The masters have asked me to look after you until you are well enough to do so on your own. You may call me Kurai, little priest. The woman continued as she pulled the spoon out, offering it to the blond boy, who eyed the spoon suspiciously. He may not have known where he was, what was happening, or if what he had seen was even real, but he knew that food had only been offered to him as a trap. So after a moment he looked back up into Kurai's eyes, trying to put on a brave a face as his battered body would allow. The effect was not what he intended. The woman gave a pleased little smirk before turning the spoon into her own mouth, all while keeping her eyes upon the blond youth. Good, you have the mind and spirit of one who is to be a priest. Consider this a first lesson, little priest. Trust in those that earn it through action. Human words are the weapons of cowards, for it is the speech of the dragon that tempers one through its workings, in that you can trust. Spoke the woman after she had pulled the spoon from her mouth, offering a small smirk down at the boy. The boy in turn couldn't help but gaze at her in open fascination. No one had ever complimented him, or taught him. The old man had been kind to him, but even he had never praised him, but she had. With a small effort the blonde managed to part his cracked lips. Naruto. What was that, little priest?" asked Kurai as she pulled a second spoonful out, offering it to the youth. With another effort the boy's mouth opened again. "My name, it's Naruto," the now identified boy managed as Kurai's gave him a small smile as she offered the spoonful that Naruto gladly accepted. "Naruto, a fine name, named for one of the words of power, the maelstrom, a fine name indeed," finished the woman as she gave the blonde a smile that he returned. It was several days later when Naruto was finally well enough to move around Kurai, slowly showing him through what had once been the home of a clan known as the Grey Beards, a group that had dedicated themselves to solitude and the teachings passed down to them by their master. However, as time had passed, the Greybeards had found themselves slowly fading, perhaps hastened to it by their own secluded beliefs. While Naruto had been bedridden, Kurai had spoken to him about his home and his life, never commenting on the harsh life Naruto had led, instead simply taking it in turn before explaining to him the land he was now in. Skyrim, it seemed, was the home of many races, and stood under the protection of the twin masters and their teachings. It seemed that long ago Partharanx and Alduin had battled those other races, intent on letting the dragons rule as was their right by the strength given them. However, as time passed and the blood on all sides mounted, Partharanx and Alduin grew tired of seeing their kind hunted and destroyed, even as the other races continued to battle in a seemingly unending battle that would only end when one side found annihilation. So the pair had ending the conflict, leaving the matters of the races to themselves, with their chosen emissaries, the dragon priests, to act as their voices in the great holds of Skyrim. Such was peace attained. The lords paid heed to the words of the dragon priest, and in exchange the dragons aided Skyrim from any who would threaten her. Naruto could hardly believe what he was told of this land. It sounded so much like the fairy tales of his youth: dragons and magic, powerful knights, even princesses. True, a part of him would miss his home, even his small apartment, but this land was full of so many wonders he could hardly let his mind even consider his loss next to all that this world had to offer. What had him even more excited was when Kurai had explained to him that as he had retrieved the mask from the shrine, it meant it had chosen him to be its next wielder, meaning he would be a dragon priest. At this, Naruto found himself so excited he had hardly noticed as Kurai and he had made their way up the snow-covered stairs to the top of the mountain. As the pair marched wrapped in heavy furs against the bite of the cold, Naruto finally calmed himself enough to look up at Kurai through the eye holes in his mask, which she had instructed him to wear as a sign of respect. "Kurai-san? Oh yes, Naruto. What is it?" replied the woman, turned her green reptilian eyes down on him. "I was wondering, are you a dragon priest too?" asked the masked boy as Kurai gave a small smile before she pulled out her own mask, a heavy red one decorated much the way the boy's was. "Yes, Naruto, I am. It will be my duty to guide you in the ways of the dragon, till the masters deem you worthy, just as I have done before, though the masters will decide if you shall take this path, so keep your fire bright as you address them," chuckled the woman as she turned forward once again, along with Naruto following a little behind her. Soon the pair found themselves at the peak of the mountain. Naruto huddled slightly behind Kurai as the pair of dragons emerged in all of their terrifying glory, the light that managed to fight its way through the clouds glinting off of their scaled hides even as they turned their massive heads towards the pair. As their gaze reached the pair, Kurai sank into a respectful bow, something like a formal curtsy with her arms spread wide. "Greetings, masters. I have come as requested with your chosen priest Naruto Uzumaki, holder of the Konorik," spoke Kurai in a respectful tone as above her both dragons allowed their heads to incline slightly. "Rise, Kurai. You have shown your devotion through the work of your post and need show no more humility before us. Let us see the holder of Konorik. From what you have told us, it would seem that once again Konorik has chosen quite the priest." Partharanx called, his tone firm yet somehow carrying a wisdom with it that even though frightened Naruto could pick up, where he stood slightly crouched behind the women. As Kurai rose, she turned ahead to see Naruto still standing behind her, his fear of the massive creatures keeping him from stepping forwards. It would seem the holder of Konorik wishes to stay hidden. Should we perhaps have Kurai put snow down his furs once again? The dance was entertaining during his last visit, and if he has not the courage to stand before us as a priest, then he is better suited as a jester. Alduin called a note of disapproval in his tone as he turned his blackened head to face the pair before him. From behind Kurai, Naruto felt himself bristle with anger at the dragon's words. His life had been a constant stream of disappointments, anger never earned, and pain never paid for. And now that he was in this new land, he had felt the hope of never going back to that pain. Yet here were those words again, once again attacking him for something he could not help, and he refused to let it stand, never again. So he did what many would consider the dumbest thing he could have in the situation. Naruto stepped out from behind Kurai, his hands reaching down into the snow as she did, re-emerging with a clump held in his now freezing fingers, but he didn't even notice the cold as he turned his masked face up towards Alduin, a fire burning in his eyes that had not been there previously, as he hauled back, his voice raised in a defiant shout as he did. "I am not a jester, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, you overgrown lizard, and I'll show you," called the blonde as with a heave he threw the clump of snow up where it splatted a moment later upon the black scales of Alduin, forming a white spot upon his massive black hide that drew everyone's eyes. For a moment everyone looked from the white spot then to Naruto and back in apparent shock. Partharanx seemed for a moment nervous as Alduin turned his eyes back at Naruto, taking a massive clawed hand and slamming it inches from the boy, leaning down so that his face was nearly touching the masked boy's face. Naruto, however, just stood his ground, the anger at his life, and the refusal to bow to that pain keeping him from following his mind's advice to drop and run from the death that now looked him dead in the eye. "So the little priest has a fire in him. Maybe I should burn your chosen one, Konorik. It seems he does not know his betters," spoke the massive dragon as he watched the boy's reaction. Naruto in turn glared back at the dragon for a moment before reaching up to pull off his mask, his bright blue eyes looking straight into the dragon's reptilian ones, a look of determination upon the boy's face that didn't belong on someone so young. "Kurai said that dragons don't fight with the words of men, they fight with action, and I won't let stupid things like words stand anymore. You want to fight me, but I'm done running," fired back Naruto as he fixed the massive dragon with a defiant glare. For a moment the pair just stood looking at one another before Alduin pulled his head back, letting out a deep hearty laugh as he did, turning his eyes to face both Partharanx and Kurai in turn. "Ha ha ha, I like this one. He has the fire in him. That is the defiance of a dragon. To stand before the storm and not to bend, but to call your defiance till your last. Yes, well chosen Konorik, well chosen indeed. Kurai, I think you may have found one even more stubborn than yourself," finished the dragon as it looked down at Naruto, who looked a little confused at the reaction he had received. Luckily Partharanx seemed willing to elaborate. "Peace, little priest, this is only the first step to your work, though I must say you are the first to take such an aggressive response," chuckled the massive dragon as it raised a talon to point at the snow now dripping from Alduin. "If you are to be a dragon priest, you are to live as a dragon would, without fear, without shame, and always to hold your pride. If you had fled, it would have only shown you did not possess the fire to be a dragon priest, yet your flame burns bright. We will expect much from you, little priest," finished Partharanx as the two dragons took flight and Kurai stepped forwards as she laid a hand gently upon the boy's head, ruffling his blonde hair as she grinned down at him, her slightly elongated canines showing for the first time. "Well done, Naruto, the masters approve of you. It will be a long road, but remember the way of the dragon. Keep that first inside and you need never fear the path you tread," spoke the woman as Naruto looked up at her, his eyes full of wonder at what awaited him. Years later we find Naruto laying on a small outcropping or rock, his face covered by the familiar dragon mask that had become like a second skin to him over the years. As he laid there, allowing the sun to warm him against the cold, even as the spray from a nearby waterfall let the mist alight upon the burnt orange cloths, he couldn't help but find happiness in the simplicity of its position. Idly Naruto smirked as he thought of the orange speck he must mark on the otherwise dreary gray mountainside. While Partharanx had argued against the child's taste in color, Kurai and Alduin had found it a fine garb, arguing that dragons were not meant to slink away from combat or hide in the shadows like common thieves. No, a dragon was to be seen, his voice tearing the sky, announcing his presence as a king might. To face their foes proud and head-on was their way. So Naruto had adorned the simple leather and cloth pants and light robes he had cut short at his waist to be adorned with bright lines of orange mimicking the marking found upon his mask. Little did he know this gave him the appearance of some kind of demon lord back from his own world. There was some irony there. Like his fellow priests, the boy wore no armor, instead trusting in his training as a dragon sage that allowed his very skin to take the rugged strength of the dragon's scales into itself, making his flesh stronger than steel when he wished it to be. As the boy's thoughts turned from his dress, he heard a distant sound like thunder rumbling over the hills, prompting his attention. As the boy-turned-priest pushed himself up, he allowed his eyes to look out across the landscape of Skyrim, a smile coming to his lips as he saw in the distance a dragon flying low towards him. "I swear every times I get a break Parthenax sent a son to find me. One of these days he is going to let me actually relax," muttered the blonde as he pushed himself to his feet. The years had forged the boy into a warrior of no small merit. His now 17-year-old self stood proud, his body a mix of muscle and flexibility that was indicative of the dragon's training. As Alduin had once said, a dragon does not stand on claw and tail alone, but in domination of the sky and voice. To be a priest is to live this truth. Although thinking about it, Naruto couldn't help but think how easy it was to say this when one was born with the abilities of the massive creatures, but still he couldn't deny the training had paid off. As these thoughts crossed his mind, Naruto raised one hand up to idly scratch at the back of his shaggy mane of blonde hair that now hung to halfway down his back. With a small smirk, Naruto spied the dragon banking towards him and with a smirk took a few steps back, gauging the creature's path before racing forwards to the edge of the falls, throwing himself forwards just as the scaled beast was flying under him with a whoop of excitement as he allowed the wind to take hold of him. "Incoming!" cried the blonde-haired sage as the dragon looked up in time to see the sage's leap, letting out a small look of approval upon its brow as the blonde plunged down at the beast. The small orange dart shot forwards, landing right upon the creature's back and rolling slightly till it caught one of the creature's spin. Just as the beast spread its wings wide and with a push forced itself higher into the air, its voice carried back to Naruto on the wind now rushing past his hair. "Still trying to fly, Naruto? When will you learn that flight is only for those born with wings?" called the dragon in a holier-than-thou voice that nonetheless carried a playful nature to it. Naruto in return pulled his mask back to allow his brilliant smile, with its more developed canines included, to shine out. "If I believed that kind of nonsense, I wouldn't have challenged that giant to a drinking contest. Come on Barton, you know me better than that. The only impossibility I believe in is the chance that Parthenax will get a sense of humor," chuckled the blonde as Barton banked into a twist, causing the boy to grip onto his spine harder and giving the dragon an annoyed look. "Sorry, priest of Konorik, what was that about my father?" called the massive dragon as it righted itself, its voice carrying obvious amusement in it, even as Naruto steadied himself, giving the scaly hid below him an annoyed little stomp for good measure before breaking out into a loud laugh that Barton could not help but join. The pair had known each other for years at this point and knew when one was having fun at the other's expense. Barton had been one of the hatchlings that Naruto had been tasked with taking care of during his early training, and the two had found themselves a matched pair from the start, only ever allowing Kurai or the elder dragons to keep them in line. So as the pair rose through the clouds circling their way up and the laughter died down, Naruto decided to ask his friend of what they were headed for. "So Barton, what does your father need? I finished aiding Dawnstar against the raiders, and your sisters carried the fight back to their borders. Heck, the poor fools are probably still smoldering under their flames." "No idea Naruto, I swear, though flame is such a low word, I pray for the time they learn their own voice. It is becoming tiresome putting out their flames when they let them spread," replied the dragon as the blonde rider gave a small nod at his words. While every dragon was born able to speak the flame, it was rarely their main voice. As a dragon grew older, their voices would change to reflect their cry. For Barton and Naruto, their voices had found the frozen power of the winds themselves to be their guiding breath, while some like Kurai had found the primal light of the heavens to be their voice. A rare few, Alduin being the only he had known of, had found a level of flame deeper than any other so that his voice could burn away the air itself if his boasting was anything to go by. The pair continued to discuss the recent campaign till they reached the top of the temple's mountain, Barton landing gracefully upon the snow-capped peaks as Naruto flung himself off of his friend's back, pulling his mask down as he dropped to the ground. As he landed he noted the presence of Kurai, who moved to stand beside him before a rumbling announced the approach of the masters. At the same moment both Kurai and Naruto sank into a bow while Barton arranged himself so that he stood at attention, his body tensed as though he was a soldier about to be inspected. Soon the monstrous forms of the twin rulers made themselves known, their massive eyes scanning the three before them. "Rise, Naruto, holder of Konorik, and Kurai, holder of Volsung, you are always welcome in our presence. We have called you here because we have received word that concerns you, Naruto," spoke Parthenax as Naruto and Kurai looked up in apparent interest. Before either could voice their confusion, the dragon raised a clawed hand up, motioning for them to remain silent. "We have found that Konorik is intended to return to the land it came from. Konorik will return to your world, and as its chosen wielder you are to accompany it," finished Parthenax as Naruto looked dumbfounded at what the dragon had just said to him. From his time learning to be a proper sage, he had learned that each mask held an elder dragon soul within it, and that those souls were what chose the wearer for a purpose, but his purpose could be to return to his world. Such a thing was unbelievable to the boy. This, the North, Skyrim had been his home now longer than Konoha, or the elemental nations had ever been. Why he should leave now? Wah, but Skyrim is my home, what if I don't want to go back? There's nothing there for me there. Why would Konorik ever want to go back there? Naruto said, obvious distress in his voice as he spoke. Beside him Kurai looked confused as well. She had come to care for the boy like a son, and to hear he may be leaving possibly forever was a heavy blow to her. However, she was a priestess, and knew that things were never as simply as they seemed. Parthenax, you say that Konorik wishes to return, why now? If Konorik wished to stay, why did he ever bring Naruto to Skyrim? Asked the woman as those present looked over at her. The elder dragon looking over with a slightly blank expression. That I can't say. Konorik long ago left our world, saying that he was called there, even as his soul returned to his resting place. That desire continued on, but if I was to guess I would say that it is because priest Naruto has now completed his training. It is possible that is what Konorik was waiting for. It may also be why he waited in that land for a master, but the truth is that we cannot know his design. All we know is if his wish is not met, his soul will be lost, and the priest shall lose our newest flame," replied Parthenax as beside him Alduin let out an annoyed breath. So I had to go, I just have to leave here." Naruto managed, looking over at Kurai, who was looking up at the dragons in apparent displeasure, though her mask made it hard to be sure. Beside them even Barton looked distressed at his father's words, the simple acceptance of it. However, before either of these two could comment, there was an angry snarl from Alduin, drawing everyone's eyes. "The old ones were never ones for telling their plans to anyone, but I refuse to send a priest to a foreign land with no means of retrieval. He is our priest and I do not bow to the whims of the dead." "Naruto, step forward, I need your arm," called the massive black dragon, beckoning Naruto forwards with one claw. Naruto did not hesitate to step forward before the dragon. He had learned to trust the pair and they had become like family to him. So with no fear the boy stretched out one arm, his orange robe falling back from it showing the tan skin below it. As the arm became bare, Alduin looked Naruto in the eye once before opening his jaws wide and snapping them down on the arm. For a second the blonde was tempted to cry out in fear but held it back. Alduin had never steered him wrong, and if he simply wished his arm then Naruto would freely give it. However, as the jaws snapped shut Naruto didn't feel any pain. As he looked down he noticed small trails of a deep red liquid working their way up his arm to his elbow, forming intricate patterning that seemed to slowly shift together. As the massive jaws opened, Naruto saw the pattern settling, depicting a dragon curled around his arm, burnt black as if he was one of the Nords who tattooed their faces. "There, let Konorik do as he wishes, but now our priest is connected to us. Naruto, should you need your kin, only place your blood upon the mark. We will know, and should you wish to return we will aid you. You may have to follow Konorik's wish, so give the fool his wish, but never forget you carry the dragon flame within you. Use it to burn the path you wish to walk. Never bow to another will. Should you wish to return to us then find your way," finished Alduin as Naruto gazed down at the mark and then back up at the black dragon, unable to believe what the dragon had done for him. Idly he looked around to see Kurai nodded in head in apparent agreement as beside him Barton spoke up. "Father, I wish to accompany our priest to this world. One of the flames should not travel alone," spoke the younger dragon as the pair looked at him for a moment before Alduin spoke again. There is no need to travel now, my son. Alduin's work is binding. Should he need us, he need only call. He now holds the power to call our aid. And the way back is always open to our kind. For now simply accompany our priest as he prepares for his departure. The journey comes tomorrow," replied Parthurnax as his son bowed his head in understanding. With this the group set their way down to the temple Naruto to gather what tools he would need, while Kurai spent what could be her last night looking after the flame she had tended for so many years. As Naruto looked around at his home for the past 9 years, back in his old home 3 individuals were looking around at one another across a table, each of them looking at one another, their eyes hardened as what they discussed lead them to a horrible truth about their home. The first of these 3 was a white-haired man whose hair hung down like a carpet behind him, accenting the red cloak he wore that gave him the impression of a kabuki actor. "Yes, I'm afraid that is the conclusion that I've come to as well. Kami only knows how this happened, but there isn't any question about it. Danzo couldn't have moved alone. The third is involved with this. With what I found on that damn council, it's possible that they were all in on it. I just don't know," spoke the man as he pulled up a jug of sake, taking a massive swig as he looked over at the pair across from him, the older of which let out a vicious snarl before slamming her hand down on the table, a spider web of crack running through the oak as she did. Beside her the younger blonde moved to gently take the woman's hand, looking over at Jiraiya, her eyes set. So they killed Naruto so that you would hear about it and bring me back. I don't get it. If they had just told you, then we would have come. Why kill my brother Jiraiya-sensei?" asked the blonde as Jiraiya turned to look over at the blonde girl who had just turned 13 a few days previous, his face taking on a frustrated look at what he had to have as an answer. "Because Naruto, they screwed up. It took me years just to figure out what they had done to Naruto. If we had come back and he had been able to talk to me, we wouldn't have stayed. At that point they had gone too far. They were aiming for the Kyuubi, so they faked his death, taking him because of his birthmark. By the time they figured out they had the wrong one, it was too late. I had you in hiding and they had already faked his and your mother's death," replied Jiraiya, turned his eyes around to the red-headed woman who was forcing her anger back under control. As she pulled up her violent eyes to look across at Jiraiya, her words came out in a snarl. "And those bastards kept me sedated just in case they needed another Uzumaki to hold the fox, or to use me to get to my children. Those monsters. I'll kill every last one of those self-righteous animals. I can't believe Minato died to save their useless lives," spat Kushina as she looked across at Jiraiya, who was grimly nodding his head. "Kushina, I'm so sorry. If I had known, damn it, if I even had an idea, I wouldn't have," began the man, but Kushina raised a hand waving away the man's apologies. "No, Jiraiya, you did all you could. You saved my daughter from those bastards, and when you came back you found me before they could turn me into a puppet to use on Naruto. It's not you who has anything to apologize for. You gave me back my life. You gave me back my daughter," spoke Kushina as her mind flashed to that day 5 years ago when she had awoken to find Jiraiya looking down at her grimly as an 8-year-old Naruto looked at her with a mix of happiness and concern. Only later had she learned that she had been in some kind of a coma for the past 8 years. Of course there had been explanations from the Third and the Council about how she had been sick and Naruto had been apparently abducted, fooling everyone until he was discovered alive only to be lost in the forest and apparently dead. When she had learned this, she had demanded answers only to be met with apologies and half-truths. All that had kept her from falling into absolute denial was the presence of her daughter. Naruto had been the light that had kept her from completely collapsing in on her after the horror she had found herself awaking to. As time had passed, Naruto and Jiraiya had managed to help her piece together bits of a family while mourning the loss of Naruto in silence. It was as their lives had continued in Konoha that things had slowly begun to set of warning bells. Small glares being shot at Naruto from people they had never met, words of demon whispered where their speakers assumed they were out of earshot. Kushina also noted that many of the shinobi seemed suspicious of her, or at least on edge about her family. Jiraiya had seen this as well, going to the Third and demanding answers, but only getting the simple response of people being worried about the Kyuubi and Kushina's apparent resurrection, but something was off about what he was saying, and Jiraiya knew it. So he had begun to dig and dig until he found it. The truth of Naruto's supposed death, both of them. It had taken time, nearly 5 years of constant work, just to remain undetected. More than one shinobi and citizen of Konoha had mysteriously gone missing during that time, but at last he had found the truth. When he had told Kushina of Naruto's faked death, her own attempted manipulation, As well as the outright attack on her child, it took everything Jiraiya had in him to hold the pair of women back from going on a killing spree. After a time, Jiraiya had finally managed to calm the two down enough, which had brought them to the conversation they were now having. So we have no idea who is involved and who isn't. All we know is that someone is playing behind the scenes, and they've managed to either convert or blackmail their way into controlling most of this village. Damn it, is there anyone we can trust? She asked, looking over at Jiraiya, who let out a sigh, pulling out a bound volume and dropping it before her. These are the ones I could find that are being blackmailed. Sume apparently is being held in check thanks to someone with a death threat on her pups. Looks like Makoto, along with Hitomi, were taken out when they wouldn't play ball. Besides that, a handful of Jonin. A few Chunin, that's all I have for sure. Even then, they're just being blackmailed. No idea if that means they'll be willing to act. The problem is we just don't have the support to do anything. Huffed out the man, taking another swig as Kushina moved through the documents, spying a few names as she passed through but otherwise not commenting. Beside her, Naruto couldn't help but search through the files, looking for her own sensei, hoping to find him amongst the files. Idly she flipped a file over, spying a purple-haired woman, her hair drawn up in a fan in the back. But no sign of her sensei, no gray hair decorated any of the faces. Jiraiya's sensei, I don't see Kakashi in here. Does that mean? Asked the blonde girl as Jiraiya turned to her, letting out a sad sigh as he let his head bow slightly. I wasn't able to find anything on your sensei, Naruto. From what I can tell, he knew of Naruto but never acted. I'm sorry, but either he is in on this, or he simply doesn't care. Either way, keep an eye on him from now on. Him and the rest of your team could become enemies if things are as bad as they look. Replied the white-haired man as Kushina looked over at her daughter, obvious concern on her face. Both knew that Naruto was supposed to leave for a long-term mission tomorrow, and now to learn that she could potentially be with a team she couldn't trust, the prospect was daunting. Jiraiya looked between the two before letting out a breath, looking over at Naruto. Kid, I'm sorry, but you have to go. To not would arouse suspicion. If what I found is enough, they won't try anything with you. They've been quiet ever since you came back for a reason. They're scared. If what happens comes out, they risk losing you. They aren't willing to risk that as long as they think they have you and Kushina fooled, so we sit tight and gather our strength. Then we make them pay for what they have done. Finished Jiraiya as Naruto nodded, a look of defiance upon her face. From beside her, Kushina stood, moving over to stand behind her daughter, her arms wrapping gently around the girl, just holding her close as the three hoped that they could protect one another from the monster they found themselves surrounded by. At this, Jiraiya pulled out a final envelope, looking across at the pair with a small smile on his lips. I saved this for last because you needed to understand what was happening here first, but from all I found, Naruto may still be alive. Spoke the man as across from him the pair's heads shot up, staring at the man in apparent shock. Before they could find their voices, the white-haired man continued. I can't say for certain, but nothing was ever found of him in the forest. Heck, from what I can tell, they lost him. This doesn't mean that he is alive, but there is a chance, and if he is, it isn't in Konoha. Finished the man as Naruto's eyes went wide in understanding. Yo, you mean he may be out there somewhere? Asked Naruto as Kushina looked as though she was about to start sobbing from the hope now positively leaking out of the pair of namakazes. In response, Jiraiya nodded his head, fixing Kushina was a solid look. I am leaving for a time to check on what I can find. I already have my people moving looking for anyone like him, but I'm headed out as well. But all of this will have to remain under the radar. Naruto, that goes double for you. If Kakashi is involved, you can't let him know that Naruto could be alive. If he is involved, then it could cause them to take action against you and Kushina. For now, all we can do is keep our eyes open and wait for a chance to act. From across from him, Kushina and Naruto nodded gravely, even as small hopeful smiles spread across their faces. For years they had known that Naruto was gone, that he had died before either could know their family, but now there was a chance he may be alive out there, and that hope was enough for the pair to smile despite the darkness that surrounded them. Back in Skyrim, Naruto found himself looking around the room that had been his home. As his eyes moved over chest and cabinets, many holding mementos of times he would never forget, a frozen bit of wood, the remains of his first successful ice spell, or the mug of the Thane of Winterfell, the fur of a grizzly he had hunted with Kurai, when she was teaching him the dragon priest's dagger style. He had taken to that training rather well, and now held a plethora of the blades worked into the inside of his cut-off robes so that it was almost like the many pointed teeth of a dragon's own mouth. All these and more reminded him of his life here in Skyrim, all except one item. There on the nightstand sat a rolled-up set of an orange jumpsuit, his cloths from what felt like a lifetime ago. Idly the blonde reached over, spreading the suit out and looking over the now well-worn orange, rubbing his fingers against the cloth as thoughts of what awaited him hit him and washed across his mind. The beatings, the names, the suffering he had endured, and despite himself he felt anger boil up in him as he felt his skin taking on its hardened feel, sensing his aggression. But despite this, Naruto put the small bit of cloth into his pack, letting out a heavy breath as he gave his room a last look before he pulled his pack on and turned out of the room. A few minutes later found the blonde standing outside of the temple, Kurai standing waiting for him, a somber expression upon her face. As he approached, she slowly pulled off her mask, showing her bright reptilian eyes that even then were brimming with proud tears as she looked at the man before her. As Naruto reached her, he lifted his own hand up to pull his mask aside, letting his own bright sapphire eyes with their reptilian slits look back into hers as he greeted her with a warm smile. The two didn't exchange any words as they marched up the steps. Both knew that what was to come. The two were members of the Dragon Clan, but more than that they were family, and nothing needed to be added to that for now. Soon the pair found themselves standing among a small group and dragons all gathered around a great snow-covered arch that opened towards the great expanse of Skyrim's skies. Gathered around were the other 7 dragon priests and priestesses, all in their formal garb, masks covering faces as their owners stood silently, all facing Naruto in silent respect for his parting. Behind them stood dragons ranging from the elders of their kind to the very young, like Barton's 3 sisters, all still with dots of white along their spines that marked them as newborns, who were even then nipping lightly at one another as their elder brother shot them a disapproving look. Finally the 2 masters stood one on either side of the arch, their heads bowed in respect to the journey that their priest was about to take. Not one of the watching figures spoke as Naruto made his way to stand before the archway, his masked face hiding the tears that leaked from his eyes at leaving his home, even as his heart beat in excitement at the journey that stood before him. With no signal, the elders both turned to the great ring of stone, calling out in the dragon tough words that laced the stonework with sudden blue fire. As the onlookers watched, that first spread down from the stone till a solid wall of blue flame stood before the boy, silent and cold. With a steadying breath, Naruto pushed forward towards the flame, his steps making a small tap as he moved across the aged stone, towards the portal. When he was only a foot from the portal, a voice rang out behind him, causing him to turn slightly, the pack on his back sliding a bit from his shoulder. Naruto, remember, a dragon priest never weeps at a parting, they cheer at a future meeting, they howl in the fight, and raise their voices loudest in the celebration. They stand proud before the storm. Never forget who you are, Dragon Priest Naruto. Called Kurai, her voice cracking at the end, betraying the tears that were finally pushing their way through her eyes. Around her the other sages respectfully turned from her, knowing she would not wish them to see her in such a manner as Naruto turned to face her, slowly nodding his head in her direction. High Dragon Priestess Kurai, I shall not forget all that you have taught me. No, my flame will never falter thanks to your guidance. Called the blonde before he spun, throwing himself forwards into the blue flame, that vanished a moment after he was through it, leaving the Dragon Clan with the silent emptiness that he left in his wake. As Naruto stepped through the other side of the portal, he at first thought something had gone wrong, as what he saw was an expanse of snow-capped mountains like those he had left behind. However, before his mind could start to question where he was, he suddenly noticed another fact, namely he had stepped into apparent thin air, and was currently plummeting down towards the snow-covered earth. Naruto had just a moment to recognize his situation before he twisted so that his face was pointed down towards the rapidly approaching ground, as he drew in a breath, calling forth on the first words of power he had learned all those years ago, letting out his breath and power into a mighty bellow. Fus ro da. The words thundering out like a cannon blast, hammering into the snow below and scattering it as Naruto found his descent suddenly halted as the power from the force pushed back on him, allowing him to land, although not gracefully, at least without injuring himself. With a little sigh, Naruto privately thanked his master's insistence on truly mastering the words as more than just a weapon but as a way of life. As he thought this, his eyes scanned his surroundings, noting these were not the snow-capped hill of Skyrim. However, it also brought up another point for the youth. Just where the heck am I? The boy voiced to the snow-tinted air that swirled around him. Idly, Naruto's mind pointed out that this was definitely nowhere in Konoha, while another part of his mind had to stop from shouting back, "No kidding," in a painfully sarcastic tone. However, as Naruto turned looking around, he spied what appeared to be lights in the distance. So with nothing else to guide his journey, Naruto checked his pack before pushing himself forwards towards that light in the distance. What seemed like an eternity later, Naruto found himself trudging through a final layer of snow as he came to the edge of what was apparently a small village or town of some kind. Idly he noted that these homes were much more like the ones of Skyrim rather than what few memories he had from his time in Konoha. As he made his way through the village, he noted more than a few glances cast his way, though considering his odd clothing and the mask still perched upon his face, he supposed he could hardly expect otherwise. As Naruto reached the center of town, he was just looking for an inn or lodging when several voices came to him carried on the wind. Turning, Naruto spied a group of men standing together gripping what looked like farming tools before a pair of figures dressed in what Naruto could only describe as skin-tight gray suits. The whole scene was so bizarre that the blonde found himself approaching the site, barely noting what the group was saying to one another. By order of Lord Dodo, this village is to be destroyed for harboring rebels, called one of the gray suit-wearing figures as the crowd before him started shouting back. What? That's insane. There aren't any rebels here. This is our home. What does Dodo want with us here? We won't just bow to the likes of you. Came the call from the group, all fixing the pair before them with aggressive glares. Just as Naruto had reached the two groups, one of the gray-clad figures started rushing through what Naruto vaguely recognized as hand size before a block of ice shot up from the snow-covered ground, creating a wall around the group of angry villagers. Beside him, his partner called out in a voice laced with excited cruelty. Well then, by order of Lord Dodo, you are to be executed as traitors to the land of snow, called the second man, as around the village cries of fear rang out as several more gray-clad figures began to appear. Naruto was at first unsure of what to do. After all, this was an unfamiliar land, and if this was the ruling of the Thane, then was he justified in interfering? However, as he watched the ice wall spring up around the farmers' crowd and saw more ice beginning to move toward women and children who were rushing to reach their homes, any thought of remaining an observer went out the window. The snow shinobi who was looking down at the pair of women before him had his mind full of nothing but the fun he was about to have as his hand landed on the final hand sign. However, just as he was about to call out his jutsu, he felt a small sharp pain, and for some reason the words didn't seem to be coming out. He noted vaguely the cold a little sharper than he had remembered it, as his eyes noted an odd red stain on the white snow before him, as well as the shocked expressions of the two women he had cornered. Then he felt his legs wobble and give out from under him as he sank to his knees, his eyes traveling down to his chest where there was another small twinge of pain. The snow shinobi's last sight before he collapsed to the snow-covered ground was of a shard of ice the size of a fence post dyed red, with his own blood sticking out of where his right lung had once been. 7 other shinobi fell the same way, causing a set of cries coming up from the villages as the shinobi before them had their chest bursting forth with matching shards of blood-red ice. The commotion drew the first pair of shinobi to turn round to find Naruto's masked face looking between the two. A small amount of bright glowing frost gathered around his arms as he looked between the two. Both armored figures looked around, horrified at the dead or dying men around them before they turned to back the masked demon before them. "You bastard!" screamed the first man, moving forwards to strike at the masked figure, his fist flinging forwards towards the mask before him. His partner in turn watched in horror as Naruto effortlessly shifted away from the blow, his arms blurring as 2 golden curved dragon daggers spun out, before disappearing back into his cloak as he stepped past the armored figure, who stumbled once before falling to the ground, his throat open in a wide red grin. The sight was enough for the final man's legs to give out as he fell backwards onto his hands, trying to scurry away from the demon made real before him, calling out in a panicked mess of words. No. Please, I didn't, leave me, no, it was them," jabbered the man before Naruto grew tired of his babbling and simply slammed the butt of one of his daggers into the man's temple, knocking him out cold to fall limp before him. Naruto then waved a hand gently around, causing the ice and snow to fall away from the wall it had created around the villagers, who stared at the masked man in a mix of fear and awe. For a time no one seemed like they would be the ones to break the silence, before a child's voice rang out across the now blood-strewn snow. "Daddy," called a young boy, stumbling forwards to fall into a man at the head of the group's arms, as he bent down to hold his son. Soon after, a woman followed in, 2 grabbing hold of her family and openly weeping in relief at finding them safe. As the group held one another, the man found himself looking up into Naruto's masked face. "Thank you," called the man as Naruto nodded, reaching up to remove his mask so that he could give the family a small smile. For a moment the older women froze at the sight of his reptilian eyes and sharper teeth, but once again the relief came in the form of the child who, blinking up at Naruto's appearance, let out an excited cry. "Hey mister, your eyes are cool. How did you get those? Can I get mine like that?" called the youth as Naruto let out a chuckle at the boy's questions, giving the boy a wider smile as around him the villagers relaxed at the hearty sound coming from the stranger. "Sorry kid, these eyes of mine are special, you can only get them if you're part of the Dragon Clan like me," replied Naruto, his words causing the boy's eyes to grow even wider as his parents along with most of the other adults look up at the boy in open confusion. "Wow mister, does that means you're a dragon?" called the youth, to which Naruto smiled. "Well, I guess I'm close enough for you," chuckled the blonde as the village closed in around the boy, now convinced he was safe enough to approach. Soon the village had welcomed Naruto in, as the dragon priest decided to find out just who this Lord Dodo was. A couple weeks after Naruto's actions in the village and across an ocean, Naruto and her team were sitting in a movie studio, having just learned that they were going to be traveling to Snow, a trip that would likely take a month at the very least. Idly the blonde-haired girl noted Sakura again fawning over Sasuke for what felt like the 100th time since that morning. Even the blonde had to admit that this was getting on her last nerve. "Yo Sakura, will you shut it please? Sasuke doesn't want to date anyone, for the love of Kami just give it up, you've got a better chance of getting Choji to go on a diet," called Naruto, and Sakura spun on her fellow kunoichi, an annoyed glare only reserved for girls she thought were after her prize adorning her face. "Y'all right Naruto, I know what you're up to and I won't be handing Sasuke over to you," called the pink-haired girl as Naruto dropped her head in a comic fashion with a heavy sigh. "Sakura, how many times do I have to tell you I'm as interested in Sasuke as he is in you? Guess what, that's not a lot, just let it drop," called the girl as she noticed behind Sakura her other teammate gaining a small nod of agreement from the boy. Naruto had learned early on what kind of person Sasuke was and had even found a bit of common ground, given both had lost parts of their family. Although she thought he was a little uptight and brooding, she supposed that if she had been left along without Kushina or Jiraiya she could hardly expect to be much better. Still, she wouldn't deny that the boy had a stick up his ass, just that it was a stick she could understand. As she was thinking this, there was a small pop of chakra behind her as she turned her violet eyes around to find Kakashi having just arrived, his orange book pulled up to his nose as usual. "Well team, the Hokage had approved our mission to Snow. The mission doesn't look like it's changed, so we'll be moving out soon. I expect your best performance," called the man as around him the genin nodded towards him. Soon the team was headed out as Naruto allowed herself to drop back from her team enough to slip into an alleyway, flying through a few quick hand signs before adding a few drops of blood and slamming it onto the ground before her. Out of a cloud of smoke popped an orange toad, popped out, opening its mouth wide to greet her. Before the toad could call out his usual loud greeting, Naruto leapt forwards, wrapping an arm around the toad mouth while making a hissing noise for silence. "Gamakichi, hush, you're a spy, remember?" hissed Naruto as the orange toad gave a slightly constricted nod from under the girl's arm. Naruto then let the toad go, giving him a small apologetic smile. "Sorry Gamakichi, but we have to be quiet, the mission has changed. I need you to take this scroll back to Kasen and Jiraiya, okay? If you do, when I get back I'll give you all the snacks you can eat," finished the girl as the orange toad nodded his head in apparent excitement as he took the small scroll from the girl, vanishing the next moment into another cloud of smoke as Naruto moved out, falling back into the throng headed for the docks. As she fell into step, she noted vaguely that the actress Yukie Fujikaze, who was still unconscious thanks to Kakashi's Sharingan. As Naruto looked over the woman, she couldn't help feeling a small shiver at the idea of Kakashi someday possibly doing the same thing to her. The idea of not being able to relax around her team was not one she enjoyed, but after learning what she had, the chance of her ever taking their word for things again was somewhere between zero and impossible. As Naruto made her way off towards the docks back in Konoha, a small orange toad popped into the living room of the Namikaze home. "Gamakichi, what brings you here? Is Naruto doing alright?" spoke Kushina, spying the toad from where she stood in the kitchen. The orange toad turned towards the woman. He spotted the open cupboard with wide eyes that Kushina noted with a small grin. Without waiting to be asked, Kushina reached over and pulled out his small bag of chips, tossing them into the sitting room where the orange toad caught them with a wide grin of his own. Thanks Kushina. Naruto's fine, she's going to snow with her team, along with a film crew. Called the toad as Kushina moved out from the kitchen to fall into a seat at the table, looking over at the orange toad as it munched away happily at the snakes. As Kushina's violet eyes looked around, she noted a scroll that lay beside the toad, pulling it towards her and reading through it, her face remaining calm as it reached the end before she set it back down with a small sigh. Well, at least she's okay for now. Looks like everything is still normal for her. Kushina mused to herself. Just as she was about to start a reply, she heard a knock at her door. Idly she pushed herself up, moving through the hall and into the entryway, calling out as another series of knocks rang out. "Ya, I'm coming," she called as she reached the door, pulling it inwards as another series of knocking seemed ready to begin. "Hey anyone, oh there you are," chuckled a purple-haired woman, letting the arm that had just been knocking dropping to her side, falling into her trench coat pocket as her face broke into a small smirk that carried up to her gray pupil-less eyes. "Bot time there, tomato, I was starting to think you'd gone deaf on me," called the purple-haired woman in a mocking tone that caused Kushina to glare at the woman, a dangerous smile playing across her face, as she forced herself to retain some control of herself. "Anko, I think I've told you before, I detest that nickname." Kushina spoke ominously, cracking her knuckles, causing Anko to let out a nervous chuckle as she raised her hands palm up towards the woman in a placating motion. Right. Reel it in there girl, it's all in good fun," replied Anko as Kushina sighed before motioning the woman inside. Kushina moved over, plopping down in an open chair, her green and white dress protecting her modesty in a way that Anko's mesh armor and trench coat combo seemed to openly mock as the purple-haired woman lowered herself onto the table, her legs kicking out gingerly as she looked over at Kushina. The redhead in turn shot Anko a look which caused the woman to sigh heavily before sliding down into a chair, her arms raised in a visible shrug as if asking if her fellow was satisfied. "So did you call me just to discuss proper manners or what?" called Anko, looking vaguely around the home, noting a few seals dotted about the room as she did. In the back of her mind she noted them as sound and detection seals like those in interrogation. Odd, this home seemed as secure as one of her own cells. Kushina seemed to consider the woman's words for a moment before letting out a small sigh. "I'll be blunt with you, Anko, you have information I need, and I'm willing to trade for it." This caught Anko's attention. The way Kushina was speaking told her that something was off about the situation, but nothing she could put a figure on at the moment. Still, the way she had spoken made it clear this was no social visit. "Information, and I take it this isn't the kind of thing you want getting out by the looks of your place." "If I didn't know any better, Kushina-san, I'd think you were threatening me," replied Anko as Kushina's eyes narrowed slightly. "Well then I'll make things clear to you," replied Kushina as golden chains suddenly shot up from under the table, binding Anko to her chair before she could react. "Hey, what the hell?" called the woman before another chain slunk its way around her mouth, deadening her voice. Her gray eyes glared daggers at the redhead across from her, but Kushina didn't seem to give it a moment's thought as she continued to speak as though she hadn't just captured her guest in a golden prison. "I am threatening you, Anko. I am willing to trade for the information that I want, and truthfully I would prefer taking that route, but if you are not open to that, then I will get what I want another way. I think you noticed the seals here. No one will know you are here, so the choice is yours. We can be civil or we can be professional. I leave the choice to you," finished Kushina as the chain around Anko's mouth slipped away, letting Anko spit out a curse. "Bitch, what the hell are you playing at, huh?" spat Anko as Kushina continued to look at the woman impassively before continuing. "You are the current overseer of the Forest of Death. What I want is information on it. Give me that and I will be willing to help you remove a certain mark from your body," continued Kushina, her words causing Anko to go suddenly stiff, halting her struggles against the golden chains. "Yo, you mean the curse mark?" Anko breathed, her voice betraying the hope she was feeling at Kushina's words. In answer, Kushina nodded her head slightly, never taking her eyes off of the woman before her. Yeah, right, I know you can't do anything about it. You think I believe that pack of lies? Whatever the hell you're up to, the Hokage will never let you get away with it," called Anko as Kushina just continued to watch her with that same calm control. "I think we both know that the Hokage or the village would hardly bat an eye at your disappearance, Anko. Heck, I am one of the few that doesn't see you as just a leftover from your master, so drop the false bravado." As for the seal I helped to teach Minato and Jiraiya sealing, you think something cooked up by that monster Orochimaru is outside of my understanding? Maybe I overestimated your intelligence after all. These words caused Anko to swallow slightly, her own mind admitting that the woman's words were true. She had been forced to claw her way up by inches her whole life in Konoha. It had been a miracle when she had managed to reach Special Jonin, and even that had only been due to Ibiki's recognition of her skills. Then there was the woman's offer. Kushina had always been accepting to her, even going so far as to be one of the few people Anko found herself trusting. Now that same woman held her in chains, offering her what seemed like a simple trade. Something didn't seem right here. And here I thought I could trust you. Fine Kushina, what do you want? Asked Anko, hoping to understand just what had led to the situation she found herself in. In replay, Anko noted a small look of sadness upon Kushina's face before she seemed to steady herself. I want to know what you found in the forest when my son apparently died. I recently found all of the files on the incident and your file was absent. All the others made it clear they found enough blood and tattered clothing to account for his death thanks to the beasts in the forest. Every one of them says the same damn thing. But yours, the one person I know full well knows that forest like the back of her hand, didn't have a report. What I want to know, Anko, is what you found out there. Finished Kushina as everything suddenly became horribly clear to Anko. Kushina wasn't acting crazy, she didn't know if Anko was an enemy. Anko wasn't sure how, but Kushina had pieced together what had really happened with her son, which meant, oh hell. Thought the woman as she felt a small shiver run down her spine. Which meant that if she thought Anko had anything to do with hiding the truth, her life was as good as over. Yo, you know? Anko managed as Kushina nodded her head slowly. Yes Anko, I know this fucking village was responsible for making my Naruto's life a living hell. And that there is something going on in this village. What I don't know is how far it goes. From what I found, you know something as well. What I don't know is how much you are involved. I pray it isn't too deep. I want to believe that you are the woman I've come to think of as a friend. But I can't take things at face value anymore. So tell me, Anko, where is your file? Asked Kushina as she reached over, placing a seal Anko knew all too well upon her brow. The seal was one of Kushina's private works and functioned like a lie detector, connecting directly with the chakra of the target. Heck, it was how the two had first met when Kushina had delivered the first tags to the interrogation department. Anko looked up to the small seal now adorning the tag on her head before moving her eyes back down to focus on Kushina, letting out a small sigh as everything suddenly came into focus. I suppose you won't let the chains or seal off till you're satisfied. Damn it, I suppose I wouldn't either if I started to find out what you have. Well, let's get started with this, but no, once we are done with this, you are so getting it for tying me up, friend, or not? Started Anko, letting a small smirk cross her lips as that seemed to let Kushina relax slightly. Well, first off, I did file a report, same as everyone else. Heck, I even brought it to the Hokage that the other reports were practically fairy tales. Next thing I know, my report has vanished and I'm on border patrol for the next few weeks. When I get back, you've suddenly popped up and everyone's talking like your son never existed. When I start to ask questions, I get attacked in my home by some mask-wearing bastard who tries to put some kind of seal on me. Bastard manages it to, but something about the snake's hikey must have kept it from working because it only knocked me out, but not before I got a look at the bastard behind the mask. Next day I go to report it and see the bastard with my team smiling and greeting me with the others. Guess if you argued they just fixed you. Anyway, I kept my head down so I wouldn't get another visitor, this one with a kunai instead of a seal in hand. Spoke the purple-haired woman as Kushina nodded, the chains around Anko loosening a little but staying ready to tighten once more. Anyway, from that point on I just kept my head down, considered approaching you about what I knew, but I didn't know if you were in on it too. Heck, I don't even know what it is. But anyway, the report. Look, I never found anything that suggested your son died out there. We found a torn pant leg at the entrance to the forest and some blood from a cut on the fence, that is it. No body, no massive blood spot, nothing. Heck, from what I saw from the rest, no one had any idea where your son disappeared to. Finished the gray-eyed woman as Kushina nodded her head and the golden chains moved away, allowing Anko to reach up and tear off the seal, giving Kushina a look of annoyances as she did. Kushina gave the woman a small apologetic look in reply. Thank you, Anko, and sorry about the chains and seal, I had to be sure. Spoke the woman weakly, even as she fought to keep her own thoughts under control. Her son Naruto, he may really be out there. Jiraiya had been speculative, but here was even more proof that he may still be out there somewhere. From across the table, Anko gave Kushina another glare before hefting out a breath and shaking her head. Don't worry about it, I guess. I mean, with all the stuff that's apparently happening, I can hardly blame you for being paranoid. So did you mean what you said about my seal? She finished, unable to keep the hope from her voice as Kushina offered her a grateful smile. "Of course, Databane, I'll have that thing off in no time." Kushina called the happiness at what she had learned adding to her enthusiasm as across the table Anko couldn't help but snort at her antics. As Kushina stood and began to move around the table, she suddenly found her legs wrapped in something cold as she pitched forwards onto the wooden floor, letting out a small shout of surprise as she did. Look back, she noticed a medium-sized snake that was stretching out from Anko's sleeve. As her eyes traveled up, she noted the smiling face of Anko looking down at her. "Consider it payback for the chains," chuckled Anko as the snake slithered back into her sleeve, and Kushina pushed herself up with a small annoyed look as she moved over to examine the woman's neck. As she began to examine the seal, her mind wandered idly to thoughts of her son. Naruto, he was really out there somewhere, wasn't he? Her son was alive. She could just feel it somehow. Meanwhile, back in Snow, Naruto had been busy over the past few weeks. After learning of the tyrannical rule of Dodo, he had moved to remove the corrupt ruler from his position. Over the days that followed that first encounter, Naruto had decided to march on the nearest base where the forces he had engaged had apparently come from. Following the absolute devastation of that base, the forces still loyal to the last king had found their way to the blonde, offering their support if it meant reclaiming their kingdom. With Naruto at the lead, their forces steamrolled through Dodo's forces, taking the massive train depot and seizing the new weapons and ships there. Within just 2 weeks, all that stood between the rebels and retaking their land was Dodo's keep, and a few hundred scattering of shinobi and soldiers that had not already surrendered to the inevitable. So there Naruto now stood, his masked face scanning the keep in front of him, as behind him the rebel forces as well as many from the villages they had liberated, armed with a mix of armor and weapons taken from Dodo's own forces, stood waiting. Naruto had to admit to himself that the sheer rate of their victory had been shocking to him. It seemed that in the short rule Dodo had managed to make the entire nation ready to kill him given the least chance. Once they had a figure to rally behind, every village seemed to have rallied behind the youth, cheering for the swirling dragon of snow, the one come to liberate them from their bindings. Naruto couldn't help but smile inwardly at how well his little conflict had gone. Maybe it was Konorik's influence, but he found himself loving the conflict he was leading. Even more so as he saw the corruption he was stamping out through his victories. All of this and more continued to flow gently through the boy's mind as a figure made himself known beside him. "Naruto-sama, the forces are prepared, we are awaiting your command," spoke a soldier covered in what Naruto had learned was an experimental armor known as chakra armor. At the train depot, his forces hand found a stockpile of such armor, and now the elite of his forces wore it alongside the more bulky samurai-style armor, making them living tanks to most attacks. True, the wearer sacrificed speed, but then they were hardly going to keep up with the speed of a shinobi even if they were naked, so the added armor was well worth the cost. "Good, tell them to wait for my signal. I think this calls for a little something special," replied the blonde as she stepped forwards, biting into his thumb as he went, spreading a small trail of blood across his arm as he marched forwards into the open expanse of snow-covered earth between his forces and the impressive form of Dodo's keep. As his blood touched the black mark, the mark's eyes shone bright red as a voice suddenly made itself clear in his mind, as though he was standing across from the person. "So, that wasn't long, priest, have you found trouble so quickly?" called Alduin in a mocking tone from within the boy's mind. "Now, Master Alduin, what would make you think that?" replied Naruto, the smile on his lips carrying with every word he spoke, causing the dragon to huff out an amused chuckle. "Because I know you, priest, so for what do I owe this call?" asked the beast as Naruto allowed his mind to open wide, his memories over the past few weeks to flood over the link into Alduin, allowing the dragon to see all that he had. After a moment, Alduin let out a small, deep, troughed laugh. "So our priest is the swirling dragon of snow, a fitting title for one of our priests indeed. It seems Konorik has led you to worthy battle. We of the clan will be honored to purge this fool that fancies himself a ruler. Prepare the sight, my priest." Today the dragons spread their wings over snow. Finished Alduin as the link was severed. With a wide smile, Naruto raised his hand up, the white crystal dust of ice magic floating around his arms as he swiped them forward, ice suddenly springing up into a wide circle upon the open field. As both armies watched, Naruto bent, pushing his still dripping palm onto the ice as a howling set of words flooded from his masked form. Soon there was an odd red glow that slowly worked its way through the ice circle, causing each block of ice to shine out a violent radiance to the surrounding snow, causing it to glow in turn. Just as Dodo's remaining forces began to start wondering what was occurring and Naruto's own forces began to question whether their leader had lost his mind, the circle closed as blue flames erupted from it, causing a disc of pure blue flame to lance out towards the sky, accompanied by a howling cry that caused battle-hardened men to go weak at the knee. Then they came. Monstrous forms, their wings spread wide as they pelted one after another out of the portal as they took to the skies, each adding their own roar to the course as their number grew. Finally, just as it seemed that they would block out the sky with their number, Alduin came. His black wings like great blades, his eyes glowing red with battle fire, and his massive form landing beside Naruto as he turned to face Dodo's forces, an eager poise to his posture. Naruto in turn looked over at his forces that at first were stunned speechless at the appearance of the dragons. Then out of the forces came one cheer, followed by another, until the force was now cheering, their voices raised in time with the dragons in the tongue Naruto had called upon when entering into every one of their victories. Yain Fall Dovah Brood Wa Krongrah. Hail the Dragon Clan to victory, came the call from the hundreds of men as they raised their weapons high, their voices rising up to be joined by the dragons in turn, echoing the cry till the very ground shook with its roar. Beside Alduin's massive form, Naruto raised his own arm, his dragon dagger shining in the light as he turned, pointing his blade towards where Dodo's forces were beginning to collapse from the horror before them. Without a word, Naruto charged, and with him came the dragons, and all of those of snow who wished to reclaim their land. They charged Dodo's keep as the dragon fire fell, following the man who had led them to their freedom. Following Snow's whirling dragon, the outer forces crumbled even as the walls of the fortress shattered under the dragon fire, as Naruto's forces plowed forwards, swarming over the defenders, driving forwards toward the heart of the fortress. At the head of the main force, Naruto shot his way deeper into the fortress, slamming bolts of ice, or words of power, into any who stood in his way, carving his way deeper and deeper until he reached the throne room, its columned halls open as a tall figure dressed in what Naruto could only guess was a more modified version of the chakra armor he had seen on the man's forces stood at one end of the long room. As the blonde burst into the room, Dodo turned a face full of fury upon him, howling in a mix of madness and rage at the one who was even now bringing his world to ruin. "I suppose you would be Doto?" called Naruto as he rolled his shoulders, taking a few steps so that he stood across the open hall facing the man, his masked face showing a blank expression towards the larger man. Dodo in turn sneered at the masked figure, his eyes traveling down the figure's mane of blonde hair to his simple orange robes and battle-worn pants. "And you would be the supposed dragon of snow? Ha, you look more like a carnival performer. Still, your power is commendable. Surrender to me now, serve me and I will forgive your transgressions. Continue to oppose me and I will dash you upon the peaks of snow," called Doto as around him 3 shinobi materialized, all wearing advanced suits of chakra armor, apparently being Doto's elite guard. Naruto in turn looked down at his clothing before looking back to Doto as he pulled his mask from his face, allowing it to slip back to sit upon his blonde hair, showing his slitted eyes, and now slightly scaled cheeks. "I suppose my dress may seem a bit off for this world, but I must say, coming from a man who dresses his forces in jumpsuits, I think you'll forgive me if it don't start taking fashion advice from you. Oh, and for the offer to surrender, allow me to offer you one in return. Surrender now, and maybe, just maybe, I'll make your death quick. Fight me and I will bring all you hold dear to ruin," called Naruto as the pale light and flecks of frost moved slowly from his clenched fist to his elbows, causing the youth to give off an ominous glow that caused his eyes to shine out brighter in the shadows the light pressed upon his face. Despite himself, Dodo as well as his elite guard felt themselves shiver at the figure before them. But if Dodo, whether through anger or fear, pushed these feelings back, throwing his fist forwards as chakra blazed around his armored fists. "Damn you, kneel before me. Black Dragon Blizzard," howled the man as from his gauntleted fists two blackened forms slithered out before blasting forwards at the youth, their gaping mouths showing a blood-red hue as they shot across the floor at him. Beside their master, the three shinobi leapt as well, charging after the blast. As it raced across the pillared hall, the red light illuminated the fierce grin of the blonde just before it impacted, kicking up a cloud of black dust around the boy. As the attack connected, Dodo let out with a belting laugh of triumph, his mind already showing him images of his victory. As he watched, his three shinobi disappeared into the cloud, confident in their soon-to-be victory. From inside the cloud there came a small sound of shouts, followed by an odd sound of tearing metal. His smile faltered as he saw Fubuki, the kunoichi of the group, hurtling out of the smoke. Several gleaming golden blades slammed into her chakra armor, spearing it even as blood seeped through the many spots, causing her to cry out in obvious pain. Her arms bent under her at odd angles. Fubuki's pink hair now hung limply around her face, her green eyes flashing as she looked back at the cloud, even as a trail of blood flowed gently from her lips. What the fuck is he? She managed before her wounds overcame her and she fell limply to the ground unconscious. As Dodo saw this, another cry rang out as Mizor, the largest of the three, stumbled out, his right arm encased in ice that Dodo realized with horror had bitten into his flesh, dyeing the clear surface red with his blood. Mizor turned, his face contorted in fury as he brought his prosthetic arm to bear, firing his clawed hand into the smoke with a cry of rage. There was a satisfying sound of impact, and for a moment Dodo and Mizor allowed a smile to cross their faces. Then with a wrenching sound, the cord still clinging to Mizor's prosthetic arm went taut before the man found himself being pulled forwards, stumbling forwards, his face contorted in fear. Just as he reached the edge of the cloud of black snow, there was a ripping sound as Dodo watched his elite shinobi's back burst forth from several spires of ice dyed red, forming a grotesque kind of flower as the man fell forward, his arm and head clinking upon the stone floor as he impacted it. This took what little calm Dodo had retained and smashed it, causing him to cry out in fear and anger. "Nadar, kill him!" cried the man as the blackened snow and dust finally began to settle. As it slowly worked its way down, the man froze at the sight before him. There was Nadar, his most elite shinobi, his greatest warrior, frozen. Nadar was completely encased in ice, his form contorted in a look of silent horror as his mouth stretched wide, the ghost of his final scream frozen before it could find voice. And there, beside him, was Naruto, standing just where he had been, his arm lightly holding a metal cable he let fall with a small clatter to the stone floor as he fixed Dodo with his glowing eyes. "I see, so you are no true warrior, just a coward that throws others before him," spoke Naruto as he marched forward past the dead shinobi, pausing for a moment to give the barely alive Fubuki a small glacé before idly speaking a word of power that caused her wounds to close but did not revive her. True, she was an enemy, but she at least had been wise enough to flee from the fight, and to kill a defeated enemy was not the way of the Dragon Clan. Looking back, Naruto found Dodo taking shaking steps back as the blonde approached, his armored form shaking, giving a dim sound of tinkling metal that reverberated around the pillared room. "Saint Op, I'll give you the kingdom, anything, anything, women, land, riches, anything, just spare me," cried the man as Naruto stepped forwards till he stood at the base of the stairs leading up to the throne. As the blonde looked up, a small knowing look, his face curled into a small smile at the shivering man above him. "Spare you? No, you have destroyed this land, its people, and its heart. You have drawn blades against the innocent and guilty alike, and you have thrown everyone you could in front of yourself just to prolong your pathetic life. No, Dodo, this is where you end, but take heart, the celebration that follows your fall will likely go down in history. After all, we of the Dragon Clan are as good at celebrating as we are at fighting, and I think you know just how good we are at fighting," chuckled Naruto even as his forces charged into the room, halting at the sight of the decimated shinobi and Dodo cowering before their leader. The crowd watched in silence as Naruto spoke again. "So Dodo, I have only one thing to say to you," called Naruto as he gathered the words into his lungs, looking up at the man, who was looking around, panicking to escape a pair of wings bursting out of his armored back as he looked to flee up. However, he was too late as Naruto's voice rang out, the power flying out with it to end his ambitions. "Faux cra din," cried the blonde as a howling wind blew forth from his mouth, freezing the very air as it passed. As it reached Dodo, he found himself suddenly caught as the ice swept over him until it formed the massive spiked wave of ice that formed a massive spike sheet, encasing half of the room in sudden biting cold. Naruto gave his work a small look before he turned to see his forces looking on, their mouths open wide in shock at what they had just seen. Then there was a call. Doto is dead. The land is free. The dragons have freed us. Yane Fall Dovah Brood. Yane Fall Dovah Brood. Came the call that soon found itself coming from as many lungs as it could find as outside the roars of the dragons took up the celebration as they perched upon the burnt and frozen battlements. So Doto's rule came to an end amongst the cry and cheers of the dragon tongue. Naruto had not overstated the celebrations of the Dragon Clan, and once news spread of Doto's demise the land of snow celebrated so loud it was said the elemental nations shook with their triumphant calls. Several weeks later found a huge boat moving slowly over towards a massive island of ice out in the sea not far from snow's borders. As the crew disembarked, Naruto headed over to plop down on a small outcropping of ice, privately thanking her mother for insisting she seal away her gear. Currently the girl was dressed in a simple white coat and pants, accented with deep blue at the joints as well as a bright red uzumaki swirl across the back. As the film crew got to work on their movie, the blonde girl let out a small huff as she let her mind wander, her eyes lazily scanning the waters. So we have a spoiled actress to babysit. Great, this is just what I always wanted. Still, at least mom managed to find out Naruto might be alive. Maybe I can look for him once we get to snow. Still, I guess there isn't much I can do with Kakashi shadowing me all the time. What's that? Finished the girl, pulled from her thoughts at the sight of something black on the horizon moving slowly. At first she thought it must be some kind of flock of birds or something, but after a moment her body tensed as it seemed to turn and head towards them, picking up some speed as it moved. Naruto sprang up, turning to run back to the theater group, calling out to them, causing Team 7 as well as all those present to turn just in time to see the massive form of an airship moving towards them. As Team 7 fell into a defensive pattern and the film crew turned their cameras up towards the ship as it halted above their position. There was a tense moment as Team 7 along with the crew watched the strange craft, not knowing what was about to happen. Then, as if in answer to their questioning stares, a small area upon the ship opened as a platform slowly lowered with several armored figures upon it. As the platform came nearer, Naruto noted that the figures upon it looked to be wearing the kind of armor she had seen in Iron when she had been traveling with Jiraiya. Except unlike the gray of the samurai, this armor was black, and carved with what she could only describe as descriptive carvings depicting some kind of creature. Beside Naruto, Kakashi's visible eye went slightly wide as he noted that under the samurai armor he saw the gray lining and tubs that identified it as chakra armor. Looking closer, he saw also the small lumps at the back of each armored figure where the reactor must lay heavily armored. Kakashi couldn't help but worry at the impressive armaments of those approaching, wondering just what these figures could want with a simple theater group. As the platform landed, 3 of the armored figures stepped off their armored head, turning towards the group before them, pausing for a moment upon the shinobi before turning back to where the actors and director look on in apparent confusion. "We are the vanguard of snow. You have entered into our land without announcing yourselves. Your vessel does not appear to be a ship of war, nor do you seem to be more than actors. However, I will need your leader to identify themselves," called the apparent leader as he reached up to pull off his armored helm, showing a simple face, his hair hanging slightly over his neck along with a well-grown beard set below 2 black eyes that looked around the group. As his mask fell, there was a small intake of breath that caused the armored man to turn, his eyes going slightly wide as he focused on Yukie's assistant. Everyone in turn looked over at the spectacle-wearing man, his own gray-bearded mouth open in apparent shock at the man before him. "Toku? But you couldn't be working for Doto," called Sandayu as the film crew, including Yukie, who seemed to freeze up at the sound of her uncle's name. Meanwhile, Kakashi's eyes swiveled around to settling on Yukie as his mind recalled his failed mission all those years ago. Suddenly things clicked into place as the Sharingan welder recognized Yukie as Koyuki Kazuhana, and if that was the case, then the men here were. Damn, it looked like things were escalating quickly. However, before Kakashi made a move, Toku broke out into a wide smile as his eyes found Sandayu. "Sandayu, you old man, you're alive. It's good to see you," called the armored figures as he moved forwards towards the gray-haired man, who looked at a complete loss as to what was happening. Sandayu seemed among them as Toku reached him, grasping the man's hands and shaking them in apparent happiness. But Toku, what are you doing here?" asked the obviously shaken Sandayu as Toku gave him a wide grin, and the guards relaxed along with the film crew, as Team 7 looked on a little confused as where they currently stood. Seeing the obvious confusion on his old friend's face, Toku turned to address the man. Sandayu here to find Doto is dead. Snow is free. We did it, old friend, our home is safe again, Lord Sosetsu is avenged. Spoke the armored man as Sandayu's legs seemed to give out on him as he slipped slightly, looking up at the armored man. He's dead, our land, our home? Spluttered the man as Toku smiled down at him. Yes, old friend, we are free at long last. Replied the man as he smiled around, his eyes landing on Koyuki, as his eyes went wide. Sandayu, is that, can it be? Asked the man, not believing his own eyes as Sandayu looked around, then back to the man, nodding his head. Yes, it is, replied the gray-haired man, turning to face a still stunned Koyuki. Princess, your home, it's free, we are free at long last. Called Sandayu as the film crew and Team 7 turned to see Koyuki looking conflicted at what she should be feeling. Her mind suddenly blank at hearing the source of her nightmares had been slayed. Soon Toku as well as his fellow armored soldiers moved over to stand before Koyuki, each bowing their heads to the woman, though Kakashi noted not taking a knee. Princess Koyuki Kazuhana, it does our hearts good to see you alive. We had not dared hope that we might see you once again. Please, you must come with us, our lord will be excited to meet you. Spoke Toku as he rose, Sandayu along with Koyuki and Kakashi looking at the man as he spoke with open concern. Your lord, but Toku, Princess Koyuki is our lord. Started Sandayu as Toku turned to him, wish a small shake of his head. I am afraid not, old friend, while it is wonderful to see Lady Kazuhana safe once more, our lord is the one who lead us to take back our country. We owe him too much to simply push him aside at the return of the princess. Replied Toku, bowing slightly in apology to Koyuki as he spoke. Who is this lord? Koyuki suddenly asked, her tone a bit sharp. True, she had no true wish to be the leader of Snow, but to hear her uncle was slain and the kingdom now under another banner left her feeling somehow empty, as though the Kazuhana clan had truly ended its time in Snow. Toku in response turned to her as he placed his helm back on. He is known as Snow's swirling dragon, my lady, or the Dragon Lord. He wishes to keep his own name private to those outside of his nation. Should you wish to know more, we would be happy to escort you and your fellows into the kingdom. As I have said, our lord will be most pleased to meet you. Finished Toku as he stepped to one side, offering the platform to the woman. In reply, the dark-haired woman looked round at her assistant, then to Team 7 before turning back to face the open platform. I assume my assistant and guards are welcome with me? Asked the woman, her tone carrying a touch of authority to it. In reply, Toku nodded again, stepped back, allowing Koyuki, along with her assistant and Team 7 to move onto the platform. Toku then turned to address the crew. We will notify the patrols of your ship. You are welcome in the land of Snow as thanks for bringing Koyuki to us. Rest assured, should it be her wish, we will return her to you after she meets with our lord. If you wish, you may follow us to the capital. Finished the man as he boarded the airship. A few hours later found the airship passing through mountains, Naruto looking out of the windows with open excitement as Kakashi privately wondered just what kind of man the Dragon Lord could be as Sakura and Sasuke kept up their usual back and forth. This is so awesome, I've never seen anything like this. How do we stay up? Called Naruto as one of the armored figure turned to her, a small chuckle coming from beneath his armored helm. Sorry kid, country secret, though I have to say it is pretty breathtaking seeing Snow from this view. Makes me happy to know we are safe again under the Dragon Lord. Finished the man as Naruto turned to him with a smile on her face. Whatever else was happening, the soldiers on this ship seemed friendlier than their impressive armor and arms might suggest. Hey, why do you call him the Dragon Lord anyway? I mean, dragons aren't real. Naruto half asked as she looked over at the man as another of his fellows moved into the room, catching her comment and chuckling at it. Yaoi, though the same till the Lord came. But I was there at the final charge. There are dragons, kid, and believe you me, nothing you have ever seen compares with what they are like. Heck, there was one who was the size of this ship, black as night. Said the man, spreading his arms out to indicate the ship around him. From beside him the other armored man let out a huff. Y'all right, I was there. You were in the back of the army, even they looked like ants to you. I was in the front, and I saw the Lord ride a pair into battle, spitting fire as he went. Replied his fellow as Naruto looked between the pair in wonder. This continued until their captain Toku walked by, calling a halt to their antics. After that, Naruto watched the land race under them for a time before deciding to move to the rear to see what their employer was up to. As she reached the back of the ship she found Koyuki sitting alone, her eyes gazing out over the land as it swept by, a lost look on her face as they moved forwards. This seemed odd to the blonde girl, who decided to investigate just what was going on with her usual amount of subtlety. "What's up with you? I mean, shouldn't you be happy? From what we've heard, the man who drove you out is gone. Your kingdom is safe, and we are on our way to the capital. And here you are moping like someone told you your film bombed at the premiere," called Naruto as Koyuki fixed him with an angry look that marred her beautiful face. "What would you know? I never asked for this. I never wanted to come back to this country, and look, it doesn't need me here. So you tell me why I should care?" spoke the woman, her voice heavy with emotion. Naruto in turn glared back at the woman, her thoughts turning to the own tragedy of her family. The fact her only home was more like prison, and that fact that she didn't even know if she could ever have something like a safe home. As all of this flipped a switch in the blonde as she marched forwards, her blonde hair going a little wild as her whisker marks darkened and her purple eyes suddenly folded down into angry slits. Koyuki only had a moment to look surprised before Naruto's hands closed around the front of her pink kimono, pulling her close so she could see the girl's slitted eyes. "Look here, you selfish brat, you think you have it tough now that you have a home. People that want you there, so don't you dare whine to me about having what you don't want. Guess what, life isn't fair. So either grow up or learn to whine to someone who doesn't know how cruel the world can be," finished Naruto as she dropped the woman back onto her seat, looking a little frightened as Naruto turned and moved out of the room. Just as Koyuki was watching Naruto leave, Kakashi stepped around the door, looking over at the princess with a look she couldn't quite identify. Try not to judge her too harshly. She learned a few years ago that her brother was abducted and killed before she ever knew him. Thanks to that, she and her mother suffered a bit of a breakdown. It's been hard on her, finished Kakashi as the lights above them flashed and a voice came over the intercom announcing they would be landing soon. Kakashi then left to talk to Naruto about what the princess had gone through at the fall of her kingdom, hoping to calm his student from any further outburst. As the ship continued its descent inside what was once Dodo's fortress, Naruto was sitting on the throne, his head leaned back as he let out a heavy sigh, ideally rubbing his head. "Come on, I told them I didn't sign up for this. Konorik, you dead bastard, what did I ever do to deserve having to deal with running a country? I don't want to deal with this kind of stuff," muttered Naruto as beside the throne a small laugh came out of the darkness. "Oh yeah, agreeing to join you was well worth it. Heck, if I wanted to get back at you, all I have to do is let you keep this job," chuckled a female voice as Naruto cocked his head to the side. "Remind me again why I let you join the guard, Fubuki?" called Naruto as a small bit of laughter rang out from the darkness. "'Cause I'm one of the few trained shinobi in this village, and I have an understanding of Dodo's weapons and plans which I gave you after you became my employer. And what was that last thing? Oh yeah, 'cause you partied a bit too hard, and I ended up getting to know you personally," chuckled Fubuki as Naruto groaned. "I need to learn to stop taking every drinking challenge I enter into. It always ends with me waking up beside a crazy woman," finished the blonde as Fubuki let out another laugh as one of Naruto's new advisors moved into the hall, drawing his attention forwards. "My lord, it seems the vanguard has come across someone at our borders. It seems that Princess Koyuki is alive and is headed here now," called the man in apparent excitement. Naruto in turn looked forward, his mask still in place despite the formal robes they had forced him to wear ever since they had made it clear he was going to be their new leader. He couldn't quite fault their logic, as they insisted if he didn't take the position then infighting may break out, or worse, someone else might take control, so he had taken the post. Over the few weeks they had focused on running as much damage control as they could. So now the reluctant king found himself forced into formal blue and white robes with a bright orange sash. His one saving grace was that he was able to keep his mask, though this only made him appear even more like some old demon lord to those who didn't know him. "The princess? Huh, maybe I can get out of this job after all. Was there anyone with her?" asked the blonde as the man smiled at his lord's apparent satisfaction. "Yes, my lord, it seems she was traveling with some guards shinobi from Konoha, if the markings described were correct," continued the advisor. He was suddenly silenced as a heavy chill ran throughout the room, the temperature dropping sharply as ice began to form along the throne as well as the man's body as his thoughts turned to his past. Fubuki started to become worried as the ice inched its way closer to her position before Naruto managed to push his anger down, the ice slowly fading. "Calm, Naruto. Calm down. Remember Alduin's words. If a town is rotten, it will be burnt. But to burn the innocent along with the villain is to become a villain as well. Those responsible will pay if I get the chance. But I need to stay calm. These shinobi may be only genin, children. Heck, from what Alduin said, time passes differently here. Those bastards could all be long dead for all I know, finished Naruto, taking a deep breath as she let the ice and anger fade from him as he looked down to where the advisor was shaking slightly. With a heave, Naruto pushed himself up off of the throne, moving down to the man. Sorry counselor, old memories, that's all. This is great news. Go and announce the good news. You all fought long and hard to see your land free, and this is your victory. Just have the princess come to me at some point, all right? Finished Naruto, the counselor still slightly panicked from the man's anger but thankfully reassured by his words as he turned to prepare the greeting. Naruto in turn moved back to try and focus before he meets the princess of the Kazuhana family. After all, he still had to ask her what was up with the machine they had found under the ice that Dodo had been so interested in finding. As the ship landed, Koyuki and Team 7 emerged to the cheers of everyone in the castle. From the simplest staff to the palace guard, everyone stood at attention cheering the return of Princess Koyuki. As the group moved forwards, Team 7 couldn't help noticing the armored figures scattered about. What also drew Naruto's eyes were areas of the building and walls that looked as though they were under construction, some looking as though a great claw had torn into the very stone. Idly she started to think that the stories of dragons may not be that far off. The group continued forward, moving into the carpeted halls of the palace through room after room until they found themselves standing in a great pillared throne room that still showed signs of recent conflict. However, now their focus was drawn forwards to where the throne stood, a tall blonde figure, his face obscured by a golden mask that seemed to glow slightly, stood. A pair of figures at his side, one an older man, obviously some kind of advisor, and to his right a woman dressed in what appeared to be a customized version of the armor adorning the others, more flexible plates covering her form, as what looked like a matched pair of clawed gauntlets gleamed on her fist. As the group approached him, Naruto made his way down till the two groups stood facing each other, Naruto stepping forwards with a small incline of his head. Princess Koyuki, the first assume. May I welcome you back to Snow. I recognize that this may not have been the way you wish to return to your home, but know your people are at least safe. Spoke Naruto, looking around as he finished looking across the four members of Team 7, vaguely noting the familiar look of Sakura and Sasuke as he did. How well, there you go, guess I'm not the short on out of our year anymore. Don't recognize the blonde girl? Strange, she seems familiar to me for some reason. As Naruto finished his words, Koyuki let out an annoyed breath before looking up over at the blonde with the look of someone not pleased to be there. Well, my lord, I must say when I hear of the great dragon lord, I didn't think it would be some man in a mask. I suppose you want me to marry you or something so that you can remain in control of this nation. Koyuki spoke, her eyes narrowed as she looked into the masked face. She knew that someone who had just fought to take the nation back from her uncle wouldn't just be looking to hand it over to her. She was to be a prisoner, her dressed up to be wed so that another man could claim power. But if this masked man thought he would get away with it so easily, he had another thing coming. Naruto, however, surprised her with his response. Well, aren't we a bitch? And here I thought you would behave a little more ladylike from your films. I saw one recently and I have to say the only thing worse than your acting is your attitude. I don't care if you want your throne back, heck, I'd be happy to give it to you. As for marriage, sorry, but I'm not looking to settle down, and besides you wear too much makeup for me. Replied Naruto. Everyone looked at the masked man, stunned at what he had just said. Koyuki looked as though someone had slapped her across the face as around the room those guards present looked between the pair, not knowing what to think. How dare you? Koyuki started before Naruto took a step forwards, his masked face drawing closer to the woman's as he did. No, princess, you wish to drop formalities and decorum. Fine, but be ready for me to do the same. I'm not some pompous noble who will banter about with words. They are the weapons of the weak. My actions are what I stand by. I came to this land and fought, along with everyone in this room, to free this land. You acting like we are thieves here to plunder what we have not earned is an insult to every man and woman who bled to free this nation, and I will hear none of it in my presence. So go back to your movies, go run and hide, or stay in your home as the people hope you will. I couldn't care less, but if you stay, know that I do not judge on titles, I judge on the person, and I don't see much before me. He finished. Koyuki in turn pulled back her hand as if to strike the man as he let a small pulse of cold, prompting Team 7 to jump before the masked man could attack one another. Hold it there, we are tasked with protecting Koyuki, and we'd rather not have to fight, so let's all just keep calm. Kakashi spoke, trying to keep the situation from escalating. Naruto in turn looked over at the man, the ice fading from his body. Relax shinobi, I do not start fights, I just end them. Spoke Naruto as he turned back to face Koyuki. You are free to do as you like, but I must ask one thing of you before go on your way. It seems your father left something here buried in the ice. Some think it a weapon while others assure me it is nothing dangerous and that your father would never have created such a device. Whatever the case, I do not like the people of this land living on what could be a sleeping giant. If you know what this device is or how to deactivate it, I ask that you tell me. Finished the blonde as he looked over at the woman who idly grabbed at the necklace that hung around her neck. So that's it, you want power just like Dodo? Fired Koyuki as Naruto paused before letting out a heavy laugh that reverberated around the room before looking back to her, and even through the mask the group could tell he was smiling. Princess, the one thing I don't need is power. If it makes you feel better, you have my word and the word of everyone under my command that if this is a weapon we will destroy it by our own hands. Now I ask you, what do you know? Finished the blonde, his tone making it painfully clear that this was the end of their conversation. The dark-haired women seemed to pause before letting out a heavy breath. Fine, take me there and I'll show you, but I want a guard with me, one of mine. Shot the woman as Naruto shrugged her words off. Do as you wish, pick a guard to accompany you, it matters not to me, but we will have to go tomorrow, for now make yourselves at home. Finished the masked man as he turned, moving away from the group as the guards moved to show the princess and her guards to the royal chambers. As the group left, Naruto cast a look back at the form of Naruto, noting oddly that from the back with that long yellow hair he kind of looked like the pictures that Jiraiya had shown her of her father. Later that night, Naruto found that she just could not get to sleep no matter what she tried. After failing to find any rest in her bed, she had decided to slip out to take a walk through the halls, letting the cool snowy air relax her. As she turned a corner, a small balcony opened up, showing the mountains glowing bright in the moonlight. So beautiful was the scene that she didn't recognize the presence of the other figures until she had already stepped past them and out to the railing, so captivation was the landscape before her. Beautiful, isn't it? Spoke a voice that caused the blonde girl to jump slightly, turning to find the Dragon Lord standing beside her, his masked face looking out over the expanse of land. Hey, don't scare me like that, called Naruto as the masked figure let out a small chuckle. I was here first, kid, you walked right past me. I thought Kunoichi were supposed to be observant. Replied the man, the kind of a smile playing through his words as Naruto gave him an annoyed look. Hey, I'm not a kid, I'm a Kunoichi, and besides you shouldn't be lecturing anyone after how you acted to Princess Koyuki. Fired back Naruto, ignoring her own actions against the women. After Kakashi had explained the situation to her, Naruto had found herself slightly sorry for her earlier words, and it didn't help that the man before her was poking fun at her. In reply, the masked man let out another small bark of laughter. I suppose not, but then again, I never claimed to be Lord. No, I'm just a dragon, plain and simple. He replied, getting a small snort from Naruto. Yeah, right, she replied as Naruto turned his mask down to her. Oh, does the little Kunoichi doubt me? I'm hurt, joked the masked man, his tone making Naruto even more annoyed at each passing second. That's it, you and me right now. You say actions over words, well then show it, called Naruto, pointing a figure over at the man. Naruto in turn spread his arms wide at this challenge, his voice carrying a happy tone to it as he replied. Ha, you have fire, after all that is the spirit. Come little Kunoichi, I would be happy to offer you a chance to prove your words. Replied the man as he turned, leading her out into a training field within the castle walls. The two blondes moved out into an open patch of land surrounded by a small wall where the snow lay uninterrupted across the land, forming a smooth white carpet that the two trudged through. As they neared the center, the masked man began tugging off his robes, showing a scarred but muscular build under them, as he drew the sash of his pants tight around him. Naruto had been sleeping with her clothing on, so moved simply to stand across form, the still masked man dropping into form as she did. Well, little Kunoichi, as you are my guest, the first move is yours. Let's see what you got, called the man as Naruto gritted her teeth in annoyance, shooting forwards across the snowy ground, her feet kicking up small tufts of snow that glinted in the moonlight. As she reached the man, she swung a fist up to catch the man's chin, but found herself only hitting air as the blonde stepped back, almost lazily swinging a leg out to catch her in the chest and flinging her back across the snow. Good, you don't hold back, Shows you respect your opponent, you may be a kunoichi after all. Called the man as Naruto let out a yell, charging forwards again to swing a roundhouse kick at the man who caught her leg in one hand before spinning her around, letting her fall face first into the snow. With a snarl, Naruto forced her hand under her, pushing up, swinging her feet up as to deliver a kick at the masked man's face. Naruto in turn simply shifted his head to one side, allowing the legs to pass by him before grabbing hold of them and swinging her round to fling away, causing her to skip across the snow again. So it went on. Naruto would attack with everything she had, and Naruto would redirect or simply block the moves one after another. As the time passed, Naruto found herself smiling slightly despite herself, the challenge of the fight overcoming her anger, as she simply let herself pump the anger and frustration she had been feeling into every attack and letting them slip away along with those strikes. Naruto too found himself enjoying the little spar, remembering back to his own time when Kurai had tossed him around like a rag doll. This girl reminded him so much of himself it was almost scary, and the dragon priest found himself simply marveling in her determination. Finally, as the moon reached the top of its cycle, Naruto dropped to the ground, breathing hard as she looked across at where the masked man stood, apparently not even winded for the exchange. Don't you ever get tired?" called the girl as she tried to catch her breath. Naruto in reply moved forwards, dropping into a squat so that his masked face hung down over the girl's own, casting a show over her eyes. "I'm a dragon, remember?" chuckled the man as Naruto found herself laughing despite her best efforts, as he offered her a hand up. Naruto accepted the offer, allowing the man to pull her up before he moved over to collect his discarded robes. As he finished, he turned to her, the moon causing his mask and body to glow slightly as the white world around them cast a light upon the pair. "So it seems I owe you an apology. You aren't a little kunoichi after all. Your will burns bright as any I have met. Care to tell me your name?" called the blonde as Naruto looked over at him, a small smirk on her face. "Fine, but only if you show me your face," called the girl as Naruto gave a shrug, pulling back the mask to show his scaled cheeks and bright blue slitted eyes. As Naruto looked across at the man, her eyes focusing for a moment on the man's shining slitted eyes before moving around the rest of his face, pausing at the small sharp smile he was wearing. She felt she knew that face form somewhere, it was so familiar, yet she just couldn't place it. After a moment the mask returned and the feeling left as she let out a sigh. "Hey, is that a bloodline or something? I mean those eyes and those cheeks," called the girl as the mask slipped back down. "Nope, sorry, as I said I am a dragon kunoichi, now it's your turn," finished the man as he finished pulling his robes back on. "Yeah, the name's Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze," replied the girl with a fox-like grin. It was fortunate that Naruto had a mask on at that time, as his face suddenly fell into an open-mouthed stare. She had said Uzumaki, she had family. His brain tried to process this face, but it didn't seem to be working. Naruto seemed to notice the man's momentary pause, stepping forwards. "Hey, what's up, Mr. Dragonlord?" asked Naruto, the happiness from their spar still lying upon her. The words were enough to snap Naruto out of his stupor and to set his mind in motion again. Something was going on here. Looking down, he noted the girl did look a lot like him. Maybe, just maybe in that name, something was definitely up. "Konarek, you bastard, is this why I'm here? Because I have blood here. But something isn't right about this. I'll need to find out what's going on here. Still, I have family, by the old ones I may even have a sister before me now," thought the blonde as despite himself he grinded down at the blonde girl before him. "I guess if nothing else I know that I'm not alone. I guess this calls for a celebration." "Nothing, Naruto. I was just thinking I haven't had a good spar in weeks. I think you deserve a little reward," replied the blonde as he pulled back his sleeve, exposing the dragon marking Naruto had noticed during their fight. She watched as Naruto pricked a figure before placing it on the seal and calling out in a language she didn't understand. A moment later, a small opening seemed to tear itself in the sky before them as a massive form shot out, circling once before coming to rest before the pair. Naruto felt her mouth flop open in shock at the sight before her, as the massive form of an honest Takami dragon looked down at the pair. "Yo, Barton, meet Naruto, mind giving us a quick fly around? She has a fire that I think calls for a reward," called Naruto as the dragon inclined its head, looking over at Naruto with one reptilian eye. "I suppose I can help you this time, but that means you have to look after my sisters next time they get anxious," replied the massive beast, its tone carrying a light-heartedness that helped to put Naruto at ease. Yeah, come on Naruto, I doubt you have ever flown like this before. Called the masked man as he leapt up onto the dragon's back waving for her to join him. The girl turned her violent eyes up to the blonde figure above her, finding a smile playing across her face. This is awesome, she called as she leapt up and the dragon shot off into the moonlight sky. Nothing Naruto, I was just thinking I haven't had a good spar in weeks, I think you deserve a little reward. Replied the blonde as he pulled back his sleeve exposing the dragon marking Naruto had noticed during their fight. She watched as Naruto pricked a figure before placing it on the seal and calling out in a language she didn't understand. A moment later a small opening seemed to tear itself in the sky before them as a massive form shot out circling once before coming to rest before the pair. Naruto felt her mouth flop open in shock at the sight before her, as the massive form of an honest Takami dragon looked down at the pair. Yo Barton meet Naruto mind giving us a quick fly around, she has a fire that I think calls for a reward. Called Naruto as the dragon inclined its head looking over at Naruto with one reptilian eye. I suppose I can help you this time, but that means you have to look after my sisters next time they get anxious. Replied the massive beast, its tone carrying a light-heartedness that helped to put Naruto at ease. Yeah, come on Naruto, I doubt you have ever flown like this before. Called the masked man as he leapt up onto the dragon's back waving for her to join him. The girl turned her violet eyes up to the blonde figure above her, finding a smile playing across her face. This is awesome, she called as she leapt up and the dragon shot off into the moonlight sky. After their flight Naruto was returned to the courtyard where she soon departed to her own chambers. Naruto then headed off to his own, falling into his bed, not bothering to strip out of his clothing, his mind swirling with the questions that the night had presented him with. As the sun rose over the mountains of snow, a thin beam crept slowly over the stone floor of Naruto's room until it laid gently across his eyes, causing him to groan in his sleep, rolling slightly away from the intruding light. Ah, come on Kurai, 5 more minutes, muttered the blonde as there came a knock at his chamber doors, causing him to moan as he was pulled from the cool embrace of sleep. While he was still letting his mind come to life, the series of knocks continued, causing a small thrum of pain to shoot through his head as he turned his reptilian eyes over towards the door. Yeah, give me a minute, he called, pushing himself up as he made his way over to the door. When the door creaked open, he found Fubuki grinning as she let her eyes travel up and down the shirtless lord, letting out a small chuckle at the view. Well, breakfast and a show, my lord is too kind. Naruto in turn just gave the woman an annoyed look before opening the door wide enough for her to enter as he moved over to a small washroom. Yeah, Fubuki, dream on, so what's up, you didn't come here just to catch the show? Called the man from the washroom as the pink-haired woman leaned against the door, her arms folded into a small shrug. Well, isn't our dragon a little cranky? Maybe you shouldn't spend your nights playing with kids. This caused Naruto to poke his head out of the washroom, a small fanged smile playing across his lips. Ah, are you jealous Fubuki? That's so cute, wait till it tell the guards. Laughed the blonde as he pulled his head back in time to dodge a kunai thrown by the now red-faced woman. Baka. Anyway, I'm here to tell you the princess is up and waiting for you. Honestly, she's acting so high and mighty, I say we just go up in an airship and push her out. She has enough hot air in her to float away to bug someone else. Finished the woman as Naruto made his way out of the room, his mask back in place as he slipped into his robes, looking over at Fubuki as he finished. Relax Fubuki, from what she said yesterday she may be gone soon, and if she tries anything you can have first dibs, promise. Finished the blonde as Fubuki gave him a small smile, disappearing into the shadows as he exited the room. Naruto soon moved into the royal hall, passing the massive pillars to where Koyuki and Team 7 stood, the latter discussing something that Naruto could not quite make out. As he approached the group, the voices of the genin suddenly became clearer, and once again Naruto was thankful for the mask he wore as he was allowed to freely smile at their conversation. Naruto, stop lying, there is no way he can actually summon dragons, you know that, there's never been a dragon contract because they don't exist. We learned that in the academy's second year when we talked about the sages, remember? Argued Sakura as Naruto shot the pink-haired girl an annoyed look. Just cause Konoha doesn't teach it doesn't mean it isn't real, Sakura. I saw the dragon last night, heck I rode it. Fired back Naruto as beside her Sasuke let out a small snort. Come on Naruto, why would a lord fight you, and for that matter why would he let you ride a dragon? This sounds like one of your stories. like the one about you and the Toad Sage fighting a giant tanuki. Added the Uchiha boy as Naruto turned her violet eyes on him next. Arrow-sensei and I did fight a giant tanuki and I did ride a dragon, you'll see. Fired back the girl as a small chuckle rang out, drawing the three's attention over to where Naruto was walking forwards. A giant tanuki, you say? This sounds like a story I will have to hear, Naruto. After what I saw last night, your sensei must be a strong warrior. I would like to meet him someday. Spoke the robed man as Naruto beamed over at him before giving a smirk to her teammates. Oh, and you too. I was told that Konoha was supposed to pride themselves on teamwork. If you can't put enough faith in your fellow to believe her word, then maybe you aren't ready to cross steel beside her. Finished the blonde, causing the two genin to look stunned at the man's words as Naruto couldn't help but let out a small chuckle at their expressions. My Dragon Lord, I would appreciate it if you didn't lecture my students. We aren't yours to command after all. And Konoha is not something to address so flippantly. Spoke Kakashi. His tone carried just the barest hint of force as he looked over at Naruto. In turn, the masked man let out snort. It seems to me, Shinobi, that if they are your team, then you should have already made this point clear to them. As far as command, I was only correcting those children on how to treat a kunoichi. Maybe you should think of doing the same. As for Konoha, don't forget you are in my kingdom, Shinobi, and I do not respect a name unless I see reason to. And for Konoha, I see little reason to at present. Finished the masked man, Kakashi fighting to keep a glare off of his face as he looked back at the Dragon Lord. Naruto didn't even seem to notice the man's annoyance as he turned his attention around to Koyuki, who was standing in her formal wear, her assistant beside her, looking towards Naruto with an odd expression. The previous night she had found Sandayu and Toku talking. As she had listened to the men, she had learned of the horrors that had occurred under her uncle's rule, as well as the struggle the people had made just to cling to life. Hearing that it had been the Dragon Lord that had brought an end to this, she couldn't help feel slightly ashamed of her actions the previous day. The words of Naruto and the Dragon Lord blending in her mind as she was forced to ask herself if what she truly should be doing. My lord, called Koyuki as Naruto turned his masked face towards her, his eyes just visible behind the slits of his mask shining in their shadowed holes. Yes, princess. Are you prepared to leave? Replied the blonde, a note of unconcern in his tone as he addressed the woman. Koyuki could almost feel the words bite but steadied herself all the same. Yes, I am prepared, my lord, but first I wish to apologize to you for my behavior at our first meeting. I behaved ungratefully for all that you did for my homeland. Spoke the woman, causing Naruto to pause for a moment. Oh, and what brought this about? Are you suddenly finding respect for me because of my position, or is this a feeble attempt to get into my good grace by stoking my ego? Asked the masked man, having heard enough false amends muttered in Lord's room to be suspicious of turnaround like this. Koyuki in turn shot him an angry glare before replying. No, I still think you are an ass and I'd sooner slap you than spend a meal with you. Be that as it may, my words were uncalled for concerning your actions for my nation. Even if I still think you are a mask-wearing moron. Finished Koyuki as beside her Sandayu looked on in horror at what the woman had just said. From behind her, Team 7 looked around nervously at the guards as Naruto simply looked at her for a few heartbeats before he broke out into a bellowing laugh, bending slightly to slam a hand onto his knee as he did. After a moment where the group looked on in confusion, Naruto was able to calm himself enough to look back across at Koyuki, his voice carrying a happy kind of approval to it as he spoke. Well said, Princess Koyuki, and I still think you are a horrible actor who needs to cut back on the makeup, but your apology is accepted. I may have been wrong about you. After all, it seems you have a fire all your own. Let's just see if you can keep it alight. Finished the man as Team 7 and the guards looked on in surprise as the pair of rules gave each other a small bow of their heads. Now that we have the pleasantries out of the way, shall I take you and your guard to the location? Asked the masked man as Koyuki nodded, turning to Team 7 as she did. Naruto, will you accompany me? I feel having someone that seems to have the Lord's approval should help this proceed smoother. Called the woman as Naruto shot her teammates a small grin before moving forwards to follow after the pair as they exited the hall, leaving Sandayu as well as Kakashi and the remainder of Team 7 to look after them, a little lost as what to do with themselves. As they departed, Kakashi couldn't help but allow his mind to fall to the blonde-haired girl that walked away, noting oddly that the taller blonde seemed somehow familiar to him. As this was happening back in Konoha, Kushina and Anko were sitting down across from one another in the Namikaze home while Kushina pored over books on ceiling, checking her notes on Anko's mark every now and then, glancing up as the woman across from her idly fiddled with a kunai, attempting to keep herself entertained. The two's activates were interrupted a moment later when a bust of smoke announced the arrival of Gamakichi, his wide-toed eyes turning to face Kushina as he raised one webbed hand in greeting. "Yo Kushina, I have a message from Naruto. Hey, turns out that actress was a princess Naruto's in the palace and everything. It's awesome," called the orange toad as Anko gave the animal an annoyed little look. "So the old man gave her the summon contract after all. Suppose you decided to keep that under wraps as well," chuckled Anko as Gamakichi looked back at her before apparently losing interest. "Hey Kushina, do you have any snacks?" asked the toad as Kushina idly jerked a thumb over at a small cupboard that the toad hopped over to, leaving a scroll behind that Kushina picked up before starting to scan down at her eyebrows rising at each passing line. "So what's up with the kid? She save a kingdom or something?" called Anko as she saw Kushina's shifting expression. Kushina in turn set down the scroll with an expression as if she did not know what to think. "Not quite, but what she is saying is close to fairy tale. I wouldn't be surprised if that's how it ended. She says that there is a new Lord of Snow, someone known as the Dragon Lord apparently." "Dragon Lord? You're kidding, right? What kind of idiot would take such a pompous title?" chuckled Anko, imagining the kind of prideful noble that would take such a name. "Yeah, except apparently he didn't choose the title. It was given to him after he summoned an army of dragons to come and fight by his side when he took out the previous ruler," continued Kushina as Anko let out a snort at the woman's words. "Yeah, I've heard this kind of thing before. Heck, I was in one village that claimed their leader could cut a mountain in half with a single sweep of his sword. People always like to talk up a new leader." "I would agree, except Naruto says she sparred with this dragon lord and she never managed to lay a hand on him. And apparently after the spar he summoned a dragon which took her on a flight around the castle," finished Kushina as across from her Anko lost her focus long enough to drop the kunai in her fingers, letting it clatter onto the wooden floor. At first the purple-haired woman looked as though she expected Kushina to add "just kidding" to the end of her statement. When the redhead did not, Anko looked down at the scroll and then back as the woman in apparent confusion. Kushina, your daughter isn't losing her mind, is she?" Anko chuckled nervously as from across from the pair Gamakichi let out call. "Hey, Naruto's not crazy. I saw the dragon too. He was massive, almost as big as my dad," called the orange toad as both women looked from him to the scroll in apparent disbelief. "So the letter say anything else?" asked Anko as Kushina looked back down at the letter. "Well, besides some stuff about a flying ship and some kind of super armored guards, there's just a small description of this dragon lord," answered Kushina as Anko waved for her to continue. "Says he looks something like a person in his early 20s or late teens. Tall, blonde hair, and built like a shinobi. Aside from that, he seems to wear a mask most of the time to hide his face, but Naruto doesn't seem to know why. She says she got a look at him after their match and he looks like he has blue reptilian eyes, as well as some odd markings on his cheeks." Finished Kushina and Anko let out a chuckle. "Sounds like a lady killer. Maybe I'll have to take a look into Snow and meet this dragon for myself. Still, dragon summons? That doesn't seem possible. I've never even heard of something like that." "Neither have I. Hey Gamakichi, do you have any idea of a dragon contract?" called Kushina as the orange toad looked up, his cheeks bulging from a load of chips in his mouth. "Muf arf nahaba hub of bum," replied the toad as the pair of women let out a sigh. "Chew Gamakichi, I swear it's a miracle Naruto didn't come back a no-mannered pervert after her time with you and Jiraiya." Kushina sighed as beside her Anko let out a small chuckle. Soon the toad had swallowed before speaking again. "Hey, Naruto's turned out great. And I said no. I asked Ma and Pa about it and they said there's never been a dragon summon that they know of," replied the toad as the pair looked back down at the scroll. "Well, from what Naruto says, the Lord sounds like quite the guy. Gamakichi, did Naruto send a scroll for Jiraiya as well?" asked Kushina as she looked down to start working on her ceiling again with nothing else to do at the time. "Yeah, I have one for him, but I'll handle that later," answered the toad as with another burst of smoke he disappeared, leaving the pair of women alone to continue their work. Before the two got back to work, Anko let out a little chuckle, causing Kushina to look over at her friend. Sorry, just thinking if we had someone to summon dragons on our side we could do whatever we wanted, you know." chuckled Anko as across from her Kushina couldn't help but smile at the thought of dragons raining fire on a few of the idiots of this village. Meanwhile back in snow, Naruto along with Koyuki and Naruko were walking out onto a massive field of ice surrounded by a number of massive pillars. Naruko couldn't help looking around in fascination at the massive area they had entered into. Koyuki in the meantime had her eyes set on the small stone area within the ring, her mind showing her small flashes of her past childhood with her father. In the meantime Naruto had his mind considering other matters. Okay, so there are two possibilities: either Naruko is a relative. But that leaves so many questions. Where were they? Wait, are there any more? Damn it, this is getting ridiculous. Okay, after I make sure this darn thing doesn't blow up Snow, I talk to Naruko some more. I wonder if she even knows about me. Well, I have been gone for something like 9-10 years by this world's time. Man, that's confusing. Okay, well, second option, it's all an amazing coincidence. That fact her name sounds like mine, the fact she had my last name, the fact she looks a bit like me, and acts like me, and who the heck am I kidding if she's not my sister? I'm a forsworn nutcase. The man's final finished as the group arrived at the stone structure. Okay, Princess Koyuki, you're up. From what I have been able to find out, it can only be activated by some kind of key. I guess it might be that necklace you keep looking at, so if you would do the honors. Spoke the blonde as he gestured over towards the stone structure. Naruto in turn stepped down beside Naruko, the girl looking up at him as he took a small step back from the structure. Hey, why are you backing up? Asked the girl as Naruto looked down at her. Oh well, just where I came from. Every time I pushed a button or a switch, well, let's just say bad stuff seemed to happen and I've gotten a bit paranoid about it. What kind of stuff? The girl inquired as the taller blonde shrugged his shoulder in reply. Traps that shot fire, spears, spikes, ice, rose the dead, summoned monsters, caused ghosts to show up who then shot fire, flooded a room I was in, caused a cave to collapse, and various combinations. Replied the man as he ticked each one away on his figures as Naruko gaped up at him. What the heck kind of place were you living in? Asked the girl as Naruto just gave a shrug. We'll tell you about it later, assuming this thing doesn't blow up, or set us on fire, or shoots us with spikes, or... Naruto started to list again before Koyuki turned looking slightly manic at the pair. Hey, mind not freaking me out before I do this thing, shouted Koyuki as both blondes turned back to see the dark-haired woman turning back to the outcropping, moving her necklace into place. Suddenly there was a rumbling as the ice began to break, sending cracks racing out towards the pillars surrounding the area. Without pausing, Naruto rushed forwards, grabbing both Koyuki and Naruko, jumping up into the air as the cracks reached them, shattering the ice as water rushed over where they had been standing. I knew it. Stupid switches, I'm onto you, called Naruto as he landed upon a spot of green grass that was suddenly pushing itself through the ice below. As the three landed, they gasped as the area around them slowly crumbled, revealing a land that appeared to be in the breath of spring. As Koyuki looked around, an image suddenly appeared depicting her younger self, causing memories to spring forth, reminding her of her time as a child, standing along her father, the hope then, the love she had felt for him and the nation, how she had been so long ago. As the message continued, she openly wept, falling to her knees as her mind showed her memories of her past suddenly cast into the blinding light that now beat down upon the three as the ice melted from both the land and the princess's heart. At the same time, Naruko was looking around wide-eyed at the transformation to the landscape as beside her Naruto pulled off his mask, smiling around at the scenery. Well, I guess that's what it does. Guess he brought spring to Snow, quite the achievement. Yo, I mean, look at this place, it's amazing, called Naruko, smiling up at her fellow blonde. As she looked up, she noticed the wide fox-like smile adorning his face as she looked down at her. With his eyes closed and that smile, he looked so much like her mother's own smile. In that moment it stopped her dead, as she just looked up at the man's face, her mind trying to understand why this figure looked so similar to her. Why does the Dragon Lord look so much like Mom when he smiles like that? I mean, she said she was an only child and all, so besides me the only other person would be Naruto. But it can't be him. I mean, the Dragon Lord is at least 5 years older than me. Naruto would be my age, but still. Thought the girl as Naruto moved over to where Koyuki was as he bent down, speaking to her softly enough so that Naruko couldn't catch it. Soon enough the man had stood, turning to look back over at her, his blue slitted eyes focusing on her as a smirk crossed his face. Yo, Naruko, looks like we need some transportation back. What do you say, up to another shot at flying? Called the man as Naruto was pulled from her thoughts as the words registered with her. Looking around she noticed that they were on a small island of green surrounded by the melted ice that had formed a miniature river around them that even now seemed to be flowing at a steady pace past them. After a second she recognized what the man was hinting at and her smile grew larger if that was possible as she nodded her head flashing a thumbs up. Are you kidding? I'm always ready, this is going to be awesome, wait till those three get a look at this. Called Naruto as Naruto let out a small laugh offering a hand to Koyuki who accepted it allowing herself to be pulled to her feet. Well alright then let's see who's willing to give us a hand, called Naruto as he pulled his mask down over his face nipping one thumb on the mask's horn before smearing it onto his arm, his mind opening into the wider Dragon Clan as he did. Back so soon Naruto, I have to say I'm starting to wonder if you don't need a babysitter. Chuckled Barton as he felt his friend's mind touch his own. Yeah, you're hysterical Barton, look I promised to look after the triplets for a bit so why not send them over, let them stretch their wings. It just became spring and snow, and they haven't seen the place since the war. Well I don't see why not, after all if they don't get some kind of activity soon I think they're likely to start trying to fight giants again, and the last thing we need is another flaming mammoth running amok. Replied the dragon as Naruto let out a bark of laughter at remembering the last time the sisters had set one of the beasts ablaze on a hunting trip. The results had been equal parts horrible and hysterical as the three ran or flew in terror from the flaming beast. Well sounds good. Naruto finished as the connection faded and he saw the familiar flaming blue portal open as three shapes shot out of its depths taking flights to the skies as they did. As the dragons made their appearance Naruto let out a cheer seeing the beasts take flight for the second time in her life. Beside her Koyuki looked on awestruck, the tails of dragons suddenly crashing down upon her as truth. Wait, you can actually summon dragons? Called Koyuki over the thunder of the dragon's wings. As the masked man turned to face her giving a laugh as the three massive creatures alighted behind him. Well I told you I could, didn't I? Replied the blonde before he turned back to the three dragons who had landed each about the size of a small elephant. Hey there sisters, Barton still giving you a hard time? Called Naruto as the three dragon looked down at him with what Naruto could almost describe as smiles. You know it, that old stick in the mud never lets us go out on the hunt. Called the first dragon, her scales glinting a dark green that almost appeared black. Ya, when are you coming back? He never wants to take us into battle like you did and all we ever hear from Alduin is that you're busy. Called the second dragon, this one carrying a small trace of yellow upon it. Hey, who are those two? And where'd all the snow go? Asked the last of the three whose scales carried a small splattering of deep navy scales. As the third finished Naruto raised his hands up, palm up, waving at the three gingerly. Easy, easy, hey I got you girls here to have a little fun. This is Naruto and Koyuki and well you see we were going to have a little race and I thought that you three might be interested, but if you're not I can always call your brother. Called Naruto as all three dragons looked between the two humans before shooting their gaze back to Naruto. A race? Yes, finally something exciting, you're going down. Called the blue-scaled dragon as he looked over at its sister who shot at annoyed looks. Before they could retort Naruto called out again getting the three's attention. Hey, there's a catch, to make sure it's fair each of you will have a judge to carry back to make sure it's fair. Naruto, Koyuki, and myself will be acting as them. The goal is the castle, so sound good to you? Called the masked man as all three dragons gave small smirks showing their lines of teeth. Sound fair? Hey you the short one, hurry up, I want to win this thing. Called the blue-scaled dragon as it pointed a claw at Naruto who went red in the face at how the dragon had referred to her. Hey, I'm not short. Called Naruto as the dragon seemed not to notice, lowering itself slightly for Naruto to hop on. In the meantime Koyuki was looking from the dragons to the Dragon Lord as if he was insane. Yo, you're kidding right? She managed as the masked man turned to her. A smile obviously on his face even though she couldn't see it. Well princess, someone went and stranded us on an island, so it's either this or swim up to you. Called Naruto as he leapt up to land on the yellow dragon's back as the third and final dragon moved over giving Koyuki an impotent look. Hey, hurry up, will you? I'm not losing this cause my judge was the slowest one here. Called the green-scaled dragon as Koyuki despite herself found herself giving the dragon an annoyed look before throwing her hand up in the air. Fine, why not, let's just get back to the castle fast. Called the woman as the dragon let out a small sound of approval. That's the spirit, we have this one in the bag. called the green dragon as it bent one wing to allow Koyuki to pull herself up. Once the three were aboard their dragons, Naruto's voice rang out. "Okay girls, wa loke. To the skies," cried the man as with a burst all three dragons shot up, their voices blending with the shouts of their passengers as all three rocketed forwards across the vast landscape and mountains towards the castle, passing over the airship that had taken to reach the spot as the crew cheered at seeing the three dragons race by. As the dragons took flight in snow across the continent, a white-haired man was walking into a casino, his eyes shifting from side to side looking for someone he had accidentally run across as she was looking for leads on a blonde child. His eyes stopped as they spotted another blonde sitting at a large table surrounded by small pile of chips and money as she called for another round of sake. Tsunade had been having a run of luck. She could hardly believe for the past few days she had been getting nothing but a storm of good luck, cards, slots, dice. She didn't seem to be able to lose. No matter what she touched it turned to money, and she was loving every minute of it. "Shizune, get another round of sake, I'm not even close to being finished here," called the blonde woman excitedly as she slammed another glass down on the table, the dark-haired woman behind her letting out a heavy sigh. "Lady Tsunade, haven't you had enough?" the dark-haired woman almost begged as Tsunade turned her brown eyes upon her assistant, her cheeks a bit flushed from the alcohol. "Come on Shizu, I'm doing so well," the blonde said, waving one hand in a placating manner at Shizune raised one kimono-covered hand up to her head. "I swear you're like a child sometimes," spoke the girl as the pig in her arms let out an oink of apparent agreement. "You know she's right Tsunade, this isn't the time for you to be drinking and gambling," called a man's voice that drew the two's attention around in time to see Jiraiya slip into a seat opposite them, his eyes focusing on the pair as Tsunade let out a groan at seeing her white-haired teammate. "Oh great, you're here Jiraiya," muttered Tsunade as the rest of the table moved away from the table, cutting their losses rather than getting involved with two sages on whatever was going on. Jiraiya for his part seemed to not even notice the blonde's comment as he offered Shizune a warm smile. "Well Shizune, I have to say you've become a fine woman since I last saw you, still looking after my teammate I see, I swear I don't know what she'd do without you," smiled the man as Shizune returned his smile. "Thank you Jiraiya-san, you look well too." "Careful Shizu. Hick, he just wants you to model for his book," muttered Tsunade, trying and failing to whisper as Shizune gave Jiraiya an embarrassed little smile at her lady's words. Again, however, Jiraiya seemed to either not notice or simply not care about the blonde's words as he continued on. "So how is the training going along? You must be quite the medical kunoichi by now." "I suppose, but I still have a lot to learn," replied the woman looking down at Tsunade, who was reaching for a bottle of sake in front of her. However, just as her hand was about to reach the bottle, a kunai smashed into the bottle, sending bits of liquor over her arm and the table. With an angry growl, Tsunade looked up to see Jiraiya, his arm stretched out towards the bottle, while his eyes had not left Shizune's face. "Well, I'm sure it won't be much longer, just wait and you'll be as famous as your lady in no time. Hey, I saw your name, you too won the big random rune draw, congratulations," continued Jiraiya as Tsunade stood slamming her palms onto the table, glaring at the white-haired man across from her. "What the hell, you pervert," called Tsunade as she flung a sloppy fist forwards at the man. Without even looking, Jiraiya tilted his head to one side as the blonde woman stumbled into the table, her fist going wide as it carried her forward, slamming her impressive assets into the pile of chips in front of her as she let out an angry groan. Before Shizune could move to help her lady, Jiraiya stood up, waving his hand in a placating manner. "No Shizune, I'll get her back to a room. You clean up her winnings if she wakes up and doesn't see her cash, that fist will hit next time. I'll see you at the room K," chuckled Jiraiya as Shizune looked momentarily conflicted before nodding as Jiraiya hefted the blonde woman over a shoulder, moving towards a hotel he had checked into before heading over to the casino. His spy network had alerted him about Tsunade a few days ago, and Jiraiya had moved into position, paying off every gambling den between Tsunade and this village to throw the game for her. He knew his teammate couldn't resist partying it up with her winnings. As he moved into the hotel, Tsunade let out a small annoyed mutter, causing Jiraiya to sigh as he turned to move up the stairs. "Sorry about this time, but until I know whose side you're on I can't take any chances. At least I gave you a good week before I dropped this bomb on you," muttered the man to himself as he moved into a room, laying the woman on one bed before moving over to prop himself in a chair that allowed him to scan the street below. As he watched, he saw Shizune leaving the casino, looking around for a moment before heading to where across town to the room that she and Tsunade had won on a random drawing the first day they arrived. Sorry Shizune, but I don't want to fight, still I'll give you a few hours max before you find me. Heck, it's not like I'm hiding very well in a hotel like this. Chuckled Jiraiya, turning to look over at the sleeping Tsunade, letting out a heavy sigh as he pulled out a sealing set. Okay, time to see if they sealed you. Though even if you were you, I'm probably going to get the beating of a life for this. Chuckled the man to himself as he started going over the women with a fine tooth comb, looking for any sealing matrix upon her. A few hours later, Shizune stormed into the lobby of the hotel across from the casino, her eyes narrowed and a fierce look upon her face. When she had returned to their room, Jiraiya had yet to arrive. Thinking he was just going slower thanks to Tsunade, she decided to wait for the pair. But as time continued to pass, her mind slowly pieced together the facts until suddenly she sprang up, realizing that her lady and she had been played. A few hours previously. Damn him. He set this up. I should have known something was wrong with just meeting him here, in this room. How could I have been so stupid? And Lady Tsunade, growled the woman as she slammed open the door, headed out to search for her lady. Present. As she marched up the stairs headed for the room the desk clerk had said belonged to the Toad, her face contorted in rage, her mind was racing with images of what could be going on. Damn it Shizune, what were you thinking? What if that wasn't Jiraiya? What the hell kind of guard are you? Lady Tsunade, please be alright. Thought the woman as she raced through the halls until she reached the room, slamming into it with one shoulder, causing the door to fly open, the metal knob tearing a chunk from the door frame as she raced through the doorway. Lady Tsunade, she called as she looked around the room, spying Tsunade laying upon a bed apparently in deep sleep, bits of paper crumpled and black all around her as small ink stains decorated her skin and the bed alight. As she looked up from this sight, she spied Jiraiya sitting by the window, his head bowed against his hands that rested on a table. He looked almost like he was in prayer, but for Shizune he could have been performing seppuku for all she cared. You bastard! The black-eyed woman called as she shot forwards, pulling a senbon from her sleeve as she approached the man's back. As the woman neared him, and without even looking, Jiraiya's hair swung sideways, catching the kunoichi in her chest like a battering ram and slamming her into a wall, knocking the wind out of her as he did. Shizune gasped as she saw Jiraiya standing, slowly turning to look at her. The look on the man's face froze the kunoichi's blood. She had heard once what Jiraiya had been like during the war from Tsunade. She had heard what kind of killer he could be, but until that moment she never fully realized what that meant. This was not the perverted joker she had sometimes meet with her lady, joking as he tried to perversely get with Tsunade or any other woman. No, this was the man who had walked through the bloody fields of the Third Shinobi War, destroying anything that dared to get in his path. All of this passed over the woman's mind in a second as Jiraiya moved to stand before her, his eyes boring into hers. Hello Shizune. I just finished looking over Tsunadeheim for seals, and you wouldn't believe what I found on her. Maybe half a dozen memory seals, each set to trigger relapses if she hit any of a number of failsafes. Looks like someone didn't want Tsunade to be herself for some reason, spoke the man as Shizune's eyes went wide in shock as they darted over to Tsunade's form, noting the blackened paper around her, recognizing it as the leftovers of seal destruction. Before she could think on this, she felt a pressure on her body, looking back to Jiraiya, who was glaring at her full in the face, the anger coming off of him, almost a physical presence. So Shizune, I'm going to make this simple for you. There are only two people Tsunade trusts enough to allow close enough to plant these seals. I'm going to check you for the same seals now, and if I don't find them, then you and I are going to have a very long talk that you are not going to enjoy. Finished the man as he formed a shadow clone that moved over to start checking the woman for seals. Wow, what seals? What deed did you do to Tsunade? Shizune managed to grunt through the pressure on her from Jiraiya's hair. Looking up, the white-haired man's eyes dropped, slightly obvious sadness and discomfort on his face. Nothing Shizune, I just fixed what someone else did. For what it is worth, I am sorry, but as it stands you may not even know what you may have done. Until I'm sure you aren't involved in this, I can't risk it. I'm sorry. Finished Jiraiya as his clone moved over, beginning to check for seals, starting in the same areas he had found them upon Tsunade. Shizune looked down as a small bit of paper covered in what looked like hundreds of little seals was applied to her left wrist. To her horror, she saw the paper suddenly turn black and crack as a burning sensation flared up in her arm. Out of one half-open eyes she saw the blackened paper fall away as a set of seals she didn't recognize shining through her skin before crumbling away to dust, gently falling to the hotel room floor. Wah, what the hell is that? Shizune managed before her mind was suddenly assaulted with a vision of Tsunade and her falling unconscious in the Hokage's office as a few masked figures moved forwards with slips of paper in their hands. As this vision flooded through her mind, she let out a small gasp, looking down to see Jiraiya's grim expression looking back at her. "Damn it, not you too, damn them," muttered Jiraiya as the clone continued to remove the seals on the woman's body. Shizune no longer struggling as she looked down in horror as flashes of her memory came back to her, even as each seal was burnt away. Meanwhile, back in Snow, Kakashi was discussing things with Sandayu as across the courtyard Sasuke was working on a few stances while beside him Sakura just sat watching him wide-eyed. Around the area, palace workers and soldiers moved around, a few working on repairing a few of the damaged areas around the palace, as others worked to remove some of the unpleasant additions Dodo had made during his rule. I have to say the new lord seems to be a bit of a hit with the populace, still he isn't the true ruler. What if Princess Koyuki wishes to take back her kingdom? Questioned Kakashi as beside him Sandayu gave the man a slightly confused look. What do you mean? You sound like you expect a conflict, replied the man, his words causing Kakashi to shrug slightly. Sorry, just thinking out loud, but we are tasked with protecting the princess, so rest assured if anything happens we will be prepared to defend her and her position. Continued Kakashi, his tone seeming to indicate something that the other man was not sure that he liked. Just as he was about to ask the man to clarify just what he meant, a call rose up from the outer wall, joined soon by the sound of cheering. Those in the courtyard had just enough time to look up before three massive shapes appeared a distance above the palace, apparently diving towards where they stood. As the shadows drew closer, Kakashi heard a voice calling out above them in a language he didn't recognize. What the Fus Ra, what? Muttered the man as his eye narrowed at the shadowy forms before suddenly flying open in shock as one of the figures shot forwards past the other, coming into sharp focus. The Jonin was about to shout out a warning, but before he could even let out a sound, the massive form of a dragon, its hide holding small bits of yellow scales, slammed into the courtyard, sending small tremors through it as from his perch on the back of the creature the Dragon Lord let out a triumphant call. "Winner!" called the man as Dragon turned its head up in time to see its fellows landing behind it. "Ha, take that, told you I would win," called the first dragon as the pair let out annoyed growls. "You cheated, isn't that right, Judge?" called the blue dragon as beside her the green dragon nodded her head, both looking at their own passengers who were giving Naruto an annoyed look. "Yeah, what they said, you helped her win. Dragon Lord or whatever, that's cheating," called Naruto as her dragon turned towards Naruto, a satisfied smirk on its face. Naruto then turned to see Koyuki looking a bit disheveled but nodding all the same at Naruto's statement. "I have to agree with Naruto, Dragon Lord, you interfered with the race, which means you forfeit," called Koyuki as Naruto's dragon looked between her sisters and then back to Naruto. "I told you not to use a shout, I could have won," called the dragon in an annoyed voice as Naruto looked around at the group of angry females, his head drooping comically from their complaints. Fine, it's a draw this time, but you won't get off so easily next time," called Naruto as he dropped down Naruto, hoping down as well, giving her dragon thumbs up as she did, which the dragon seemed to nod in approval of. Koyuki in turn was helped down from her ride by Naruto, turning to give the dragon a small bow of gratitude that it returned before the three kicked off from the ground, shooting up to vanish a moment later into portals of blue fire. As the three turned, they found the stunned figures of Kakashi, Sandayu as well as the other members of Team 7 looking at the three, blank shock written across all of their faces as the three made their way forwards. As they neared the rest, Naruto turned, grinning to her teammates, a pleased smile spreading across her face. "So what was that about there not being dragons?" she called, smirking at the stunned faces on her teammates' faces. Before any of them could comment, the three passed by them, headed into the castle, chatting about the flight as the two women kept calling the Dragon Lord out for his cheating in their race. It was a few hours later, after some insistence from Naruto, Koyuki found herself taking a tour of the palace, meeting with dignitaries and the like, discussing the effects of her father's machine as guards and dignitaries alike marveled at her father's work. In Naruto's own words, this was her family's legacy. It seemed right she be the one to spread the good news. Kakashi had delegated himself as her guard, allowing the genin to simply wander aimlessly. After having her fun pointing out just how right she had been to her teammates, Naruto had moved off to explore grounds as the warmth slowly pushed its way deeper into spring, the icy white slowly creeping back to show vibrant green that moved to cover the landscape. As the blonde girl marched out onto a familiar balcony, the expanse of snow opened up patches of green already starting to dot the land under a noonday sun. I have to say, this place just keeps getting more and more like my home every day, chuckled Naruto as he stepped out onto the balcony, Naruto smiling up at him before looking back out at the view. It must have been an amazing place. I mean, I've been all over the elemental nations and I've never seen something like this, replied Naruto as Naruto nodded. All over the nations? For someone so young, you seem to have seen a lot of this world. Yeah, I guess so. I traveled with my sensei since I was born. Heck, I didn't have a solid home till I was 8. Naruto spoke, her words catching Naruto's interest. Oh, so how did you find yourself in Konoha? I was under the impression that most of the villages don't exactly welcome foreign people to live in them. Oh yeah, I guess, replied the girl, her face dropping slightly as the circumstances behind her life in Konoha came back to her. Even as these thoughts played their way across her mind, she couldn't help but wonder how she could be so open with this lord. Come on Naruto, what are you doing? Mom and sensei told you to keep information on you limited and now you're blabbing to this lord. I mean, sure, he gave me a ride on dragons, and sparred with me, and helped me to show up Sasuke and Sakura. But still, I mean, why do I feel so relaxed around him? Thought the girl as she chanced to glance over at the man's masked face. Naruto had been watching the girl's expression and could guess what was going through the girl's mind, deciding to offer a little reassurance to the girl. If this subject bothers you, I understand. We all have problems from our past that we like to keep private. Can I at least ask you one thing? Finished the masked man as Naruto looked over at him for a moment before nodding her head for the man to go ahead. You keep talking about your sensei, but I don't recall you talking about any of your family. Do you not get along with them? His words caused Naruto to give him a puzzled look before violently shaking her head back and forth. What idiot? No, my mom's awesome, she's a great kunoichi, and my dad was awesome too, he was a hero of our home, called Naruto before slapping her hands over her mouth as Naruto let out a deep, rich laugh. Well, they sound amazing. I am sorry it sound like your father has passed, but to depart a hero is a fate many are not so lucky to have, and if he was as great a man as you say, I'm sure he would be proud of you, Naruto. Finished the Dragon Lord as he turned, leaving the stunned Naruto to look after him, a small warmth she couldn't at first identify working its way through her heart. With a small start, she noticed it was the same feeling she got whenever Kushina had praised her, that warm feeling that came from family, but why would it come from the Dragon Lord? While Naruto pondered this, Naruto made his way through the halls, his mind filled with the possibilities of what he had learned from his brief discussion with Naruto. So she was gone until she was 8 with this sensei of hers. That would mean I left long before she ever set foot in the village, and from what it sounds like, her father has been dead for a long time, and her mom was a kunoichi. Something doesn't add up. Why would she be with her sensei for so long while her mother stayed in the village but still talks so fondly of her? Darn it, the more I learn the less makes sense with this whole thing. On top of that, I'm on a time limit with this thing. They are leaving tomorrow. Darn it, I don't think I'm going to get the answers I want just sitting in snow. Still, if I want to get my answers, I may have to go back to that hellhole. Why can't things ever be easy? The man's thoughts continued until he found himself standing in the pillared throne room, spying Koyuki discussing things with a few of the faces he recalled from the rebellion days. As his eyes fell on them, he couldn't help feel a small smirk play across his lips. Well, I suppose if I do need to take a trip, I might have found someone to look after things while I'm gone, thought the blonde man as he headed over to where the group stood discussing the recent changes to the land of snow. A day later found Jiraiya sitting at a small table idly taking a drink from a bottle of sake as he looked out over tops of buildings. With a sigh, he passed the bottle over to the dark-haired woman beside him to take the bottle, swigging away at it like she intended to drain the bottle. After she could force no more of the liquor down her throat, she handed the bottle off to the final member of the trio, who finished the bottle in one swig before carelessly flinging it behind her to shatter against the hotel room wall before she pulled another bottle up, cracking the top off and taking a swig before continuing, allowing the bottle to continue its journey back the way its fellow had come. I just can't believe it. Shizune managed, her voice twinged with equal parts sadness and anger as she took another swig before passing it over to Jiraiya, who nodded grimly as he accepted the bottle. "Trust, it doesn't get any easier with time. Still, at least you two are out of their control. Kami only knows what they would have done with even half those seals, replied Jiraiya as she took another swig of liquor. Those damn it, calling them monsters is too good for them. How could they do this, Kushina, little Naruto, Naruto? I say we go there now and kill every one of those self-righteous bastards. Tsunade called as the bottle found its way to her again. I wish we could Tsunade, but we don't even know who to aim our attacks at. For all we know, more people are sealed like you and Shizune were. We can't go in justice blazing and just hope to hit the ones responsible. Damn it, grumbled the blonde woman, taking another swig before passing the bottle over to her apprentice. Tsunade had been chomping at the bit ever since she had found herself waking in Jiraiya's room, Shizune sitting on the edge of her bed quietly muttering something she couldn't quite make out. Then as she sat up, the memories had flooded back to her, all those points the seals had been keeping at bay. The day she had returned to find Naruto's condition, how she and Shizune had confronted the third. Then on her examination of Kushina, finding the drugs they were pumping into the woman to keep her in a coma. All of this had culminated in them heading to demand answers from the third. However, when they had arrived, they had been ambushed, the seals slamming down on them before all thought was silenced. The memories caused her to audibly groan, drawing Jiraiya's attention to the woman before he worked to keep helping her with the flood of memories. When she was finally managed to get her thoughts under control, Jiraiya moved to explain what had happened to the pair. It seemed the seals in place were meant to keep Tsunade and Shizune from wishing to return to Konoha, or remember anything about the village. The seals would redirect any thought they had, assaulting them with the worst memories that either helped in driving a further wedge between Konoha and the pair. It seems there was a failsafe in place, some kind of event that if triggered would cause the pair to return, but it had been destroyed along with the rest of the seals. So the three now sat passing drinks as the horrible truth of their situation fell upon them. So what are we going to do? We can't go back to Konoha, it will tip them off that we aren't sealed anymore, and we can't just leave Kushina and Naruto there alone. Spoke Shizune as they leaned forward, her arms resting on the table as Tsunade stroked her hair, gently trying to comfort her surrogate daughter. I don't know, at this time we're stuck, we don't know who to trust. I can't think of a safe place to go that wouldn't be just as dangerous as Konoha. Heck, Suna is out cause of the alliance. None of the minor villages would harbor us if Konoha went on the offensive. As for the rest, Kumo, Kiri, Iwi, we'd be lucky if they didn't kill us outright, and that's being optimistic. Jiraiya finished as Tsunade bowed her head in agreement. And we can't just wander the nations with them. Heck, we'd just be asking to walk into an ambush. I don't know, Jiraiya, it just seems hopeless. How could things have gone so wrong? Asked the blonde as her teammate gave her a small smirk. I'm sorry to say you might have it backwards. The question is when things were right. From what I found, this goes back further than either of us, replied Jiraiya in a saddened tone. The pair looked at one another for a few moments before a poof of smoke caused the three to whirl, each holding a weapon of some kind in their hands, Tsunade holding the bottle she had held like a club. As the smoke cloud dissipated, a small orange toad found himself facing quite the welcoming party. Hi, called Gamakichi, his arms raised in apparent surrender. The three lowered their weapons, giving the toad a set of annoyed looks. Gamakichi, Kami kid, what are you doing here? Called Jiraiya as the toad lowered his hands, reaching behind his back to produce a scroll, which he then held out, his arms still trembling thanks to the greeting he had just received. I was just dropping off a scroll from Naruto, I'll be going now. Managed the toad before another cloud of smoke announced its departure. Jiraiya lightly rubbed his head, his mind showing him Gamabuto giving him a talking to for scaring his son half to death. Shizune in the meantime reached over and unrolled the scroll, scanning before looking up from it to the liquor bottles. Hey Jiraiya, did you spike the liquor as a fallback plan to check us for seals? Asked the dark-haired woman as Tsunade glared over at her teammate, and the toad sage raised his hands in a defensive gesture. No heck, if I did I'd be drugging myself right now. Wait, why? Well, because either I'm more drunk than I thought, or I think we may have just found a place that may just have what we are looking for. Finished the woman as she handed the scroll over to Jiraiya as Tsunade leaned over to read it as well, the pair's eyes growing with each passing line. As the pair finished, they both turned to face one another, wide smiles playing across their faces. You know, Shizune, I was just thinking how nice it would be to visit a mountain resort, say in snow country. Chuckled Tsunade as Shizune let out a small hiccup, giving her lady a smile in reply. It was late afternoon in snow that found Naruto relaxing in the courtyard as he watched Team 7 running through their drills as Kakashi sat on a bench idly flipping through a small orange book. As the team finished another sparring match between Naruto and Sasuke, the blonde couldn't help but wonder what the heck was up with this supposed Jonin's teaching method. Okay, I get giving letting them spar, but come on, that is to improve the skills they already have. You can't make up completely new strategies if all you have to work against is the same pattern. At least Naruto and the dark-haired one seem to have their own drive. The old ones help them if they get the personality of that pink-haired one. Still, she seems intelligent, so it's not like she couldn't improve. Everything I come up with just comes back to the sensei. Well, might as well do what I can rather not lose the chance at family thanks to laziness. Finished the blonde as he pushed himself up, moving over towards the group, causing the genin to halt their work and Kakashi to look up from his book. Yes, Lord, can we help you somehow? Asked the gray-haired man, his tone indicating he didn't appreciate the blonde's presence. I'm not sure that you could, Shinobi, but then I'm not really interested in you. My question is for Naruto and her fellows. Continued Naruto as the three genin looked up at the Lord. I was watching their exercises and wanted to offer my assistance rather than watch them waste their time. Your team brought Princess Koyuki back, but from what I've seen, if you had dealt with Dodo, at best one of you would have died, and that is being generous. Finished Naruto as the genin looked between each other with concern or annoyance depending on which of them it was. Kakashi in turn glared at the blonde, snapping his book shut as he rose to his feet, turning to be eye to eye with the Lord. I don't think I heard you properly, Dragon Lord. It sounds like you were questioning my team's abilities. Spoke the man through clenched teeth. Oh, you caught on to that one, did you? Oh, and for the record, I wasn't insulting your team, I was pointing out your failure as a teacher, or at least from what I've seen of it. Replied Naruto, not stepping down from Kakashi's glare. Of course, if you'd like to prove me wrong, I'd be more than happy to have a match with you. After all, words mean nothing next to what actions can prove, Naruto said while stepped back, gesturing to the open courtyard. Kakashi was close to breaking the Lord before him in half, international incident or not. Ever since he had gotten to snow, this Lord had been rubbing him the wrong way, taking shots at Konoha, and his own arguments was the final straw. He was going to enjoy knocking this guy off his high horse. Well, if his Lord insists, I would be happy to show him what a competent fighter is capable of. Excellent, once we are finished I think I'll offer your students a chance at some training. Finished Naruto as the two men headed out towards into the open courtyard. As the pair headed out, the genin were left staring after them, completely lost as to what the Lord thought he could do against a jonin like Kakashi. Is Kakashi really going to fight the Dragon Lord? Asked Sakura, looking over at Naruto and Sasuke, who were just as lost as she was. I think so, but I mean training from the Dragon Lord, I wonder why, added Naruto as beside her Sasuke let out a snort. Who cares, whichever is stronger is the one we want training us, let them fight. Finished Sasuke as the three's eyes turned over towards the pair of combatants. As Naruto turned to face Kakashi, shrugging off his formal robe, showing his discolored orange robes underneath, cracking his neck as he turned his masked face around to see Kakashi standing across from him in a relaxed stance, his hand in his pants pockets and a confident look upon his brow. This Dragon Lord may have fought in a war with common soldiers, heck, he may have a strong summon, but those did not make him up to par with a jonin of Konoha. Well, you don't look like you're taking me as a threat, big mistake. Consider this a lesson, always consider a battle like it may be your last, if not then you only play the fool. Called Naruto before glittering mist began to gather around entire body, a small whisper falling from his lips. Kakashi had just enough time to register the danger before Naruto flew past him, a spiked trail of jagged ice forming a deadly path from where he had begun. With a biting sensation, Kakashi looked down to see ice coating his left arm, holding his hand frozen into his pant leg. Looking up, he found the masked figure of the Dragon Lord seemed to flicker out of existence once again. Kakashi's instincts screamed at him moments before he threw himself forwards to avoid a sudden pillar of ice that formed right where he had been standing moments before. Even as he threw himself forward, his visible eye spotted his opponent flickering back to visibility behind the ice pillar he had just avoided. His looked on in horror as Naruto swung a leg round, crashing into the pillar, turning it into a hail of crushing chunks of ice that flew forwards at him. In a panic, Kakashi tore his headband aside, revealing the spinning Sharingan as he pushed himself to dip in and out of the frozen projectiles. Just as he had managed to dodge the last of the projectiles, he was forced to pull his free arm up to block a crushing haymaker that flung him backwards into a wall of ice he hadn't noticed a moment before. As Kakashi pushed himself forwards with his remaining hand, he felt another biting cold as he looked down to see most of his free arm now covered in a layer of ice along with both his legs. Then the sound of clapping drew his eyes up to where the Dragon Lord stood as he gave the gray-haired man a solo applause. "Well, that was fun, you lasted a whole 30 seconds, and I must say I'm not impressed. This isn't over, I'm still standing and your pathetic ice won't slow me down. If this is your best shot, then you have no chance," called Kakashi as the clapping stopped. Without a pause, Naruto walked over to a boulder that had become encased in ice during his initial charge. As he reached the frozen item, he turned to Kakashi, raising one hand up so that the Jonin could see it clearly. As Kakashi watched the fingers snap, the sound echoing across the courtyard as the ice and the boulder fell to powder. A sudden chill ran through Kakashi's body that had nothing to do with the cold around him. "I see you understand, the moment my ice touched you this match was over. Had I wished it I would have left you crippled with one snap, but..." Naruto gave a small wave of his hand as the ice broke from Kakashi's arms and legs, falling to shatter on the ground. "This was only a simple spar, now where were we?" called Naruto as he turned back towards the three genin who were looking between Kakashi and the Dragon Lord, their mouths open in complete shock. While Kakashi worked to pick up whatever shattered piece remained of his pride, Naruto moved over to address the three genin he would be observing, noting that Sasuke, the boy he vaguely recognized from his childhood, was looking at him. "Well, I suppose I should have your names. I know Naruto well enough, so we will start with you," he finished, pointing towards Sakura, who looked a little afraid of the man before her. I'm Sakura," the pink-haired girl managed, causing Naruto to roll his eyes behind his mask. "Oh come on, this can't be the first time she has seen combat, she needs a lot of work," thought the blonde as he turned, pointing at Sasuke. "I am Sasuke Uchiha," spoke the boy, his voice cold and emotionless. "Well, he hasn't changed much. Oh well, maybe I can knock some sense into him today. If I'm lucky I'll even make it to where they won't get Naruto killed," finished Naruto. "Okay, well, I'll be fast as we only have a day to do this. Here's how it works: when I say jump, you jump. When I tell you to do something, you do it. The moment you are strong enough to defeat me, then you are strong enough to argue with me. I don't care about words, titles, or boasts." So with that said, Naruto finished as a small flicker of ice crystals began to surround him again. "Come at me with everything you have, keep an eye on each other, and try and use each other and the situation to your advantage. So come at me, children," called Naruto. Looked around at the three to move. For a second it didn't look like any of them would, until Sasuke leapt back, flying through hand size before spitting a fireball forwards at Naruto as Sakura and Naruto shot out in opposite directions. As the flame shot forwards, Naruto swung his hand forwards, slamming it straight into the fire. The three genin looked stunned as they watched the glow of the fire suddenly vanish to be replaced by a cloud of bits of snow now floating down around the masked man as he turned his head around to focus on Sasuke. "Well, not a bad start. You at least were listening to my match with your sensei," called Naruto, swinging his head around to face Sakura, who seemed to be suddenly stunned. With a sudden flicker, Naruto was standing before the girl as she looks up at him, obviously terrified. "You are afraid? There is no shame in that. When you face a greater force, fear is natural, but you are allowing your fear to control you, child, and fear will not protect you or anyone else. You have brains enough to see that, but you must choose. Consider this a lesson in what fear alone will grant you," finished Naruto as he dipped, ramming a fist into the girl's chest, causing her to cry out in pain as she curled to the ground. "Sakura!" cried Naruto as she shot across the ground, her concern for her teammate clouding her mind. Naruto turned, catching the strike from Naruto before swinging her around into the ground beside Sakura, sending a few cracks from the ice. "Concern for a comrade is good, Naruto, but you are no good to them dead, and you can't always be there to protect them. You have a flame that few possess, but to help some you must let them fall no matter how hard it is," finished Naruto as the blonde girl swung her other arms around, causing Naruto to duck the blow before slamming her down beside Sakura, before turning to catch Sasuke's kick in his open palm, swinging the Uchiha around and laying him out next to his teammate. "A good strike, but alone you didn't have a chance against me. If you can come with Naruto, you might have gotten Sakura away from me, and even landed a single blow, but if you always strike alone, then you will fall alone." You have a strong spirit, Sasuke, but if you are not careful it will burn you. That is where a comrade can save you, but only if you have them. Finished the blonde as he let go of the final genin's leg, taking a step back from the three and looking down as each turned their faces up to face him, anger, fear, and confusion written on their faces. Consider my words when you come at me again. Now up, called the Dragon Lord as the three genin looked between each other. Sasuke was the first to rise, his legs feeling weak under him as he stumbled slightly from the last blow. Beside him Naruto pushed herself up as well, and turned to see Sakura still on her knees, small tears in her eyes from the pain of Naruto's blow. Naruto was about to help her teammate as the Dragon Lord's words suddenly flashed through her mind, causing her to stop as she looked down at her teammate. Sakura looked up to see her team standing beside her before looking across to see the masked man. His face turned her to those eyeholes boring into her own. With a push, Sakura tried to rise to her feet but fell forwards onto the snowy ground, letting out a hiss of pain as she did. As her eyes turned up, she saw that none of the three had moved. Sasuke and Naruto were just looking down at her, their expressions with obvious concern, but their bodies remaining motionless. Fear will not protect you, or anyone else. The words the Dragon Lord had just given her flashed through her mind as she looked down from the pair, her mind showing her all of their work since team formation. Just what her own fear and weakness had done for them, and for her. With another force of effort, Sakura struggled to her feet, shaking slightly but managing to move beside her fellows, looking across at the Dragon Lord, who in turn spread his arms wide. Well, it seems I am in the presence of kunoichi and shinobi after all. Good. This is the lesson I give you three. Each of you have faults to battle, but the first step is to stand in defiance of it. Now come at me, warriors. Called Naruto as Team 7 charged him once again. The rest of the day found Team 7 being repeatedly knocked around, as each continued to rise, each time gaining a small satisfaction in their own persistence, for with each attempt came one more step towards their own success. The next day when the four shinobi departed, the three genin would leave battered and tired, but walking taller than they had when they had entered into the land of snow. As they left, Naruto watched them from under his mask, his mind wondering just when he would be getting his chance to see if Naruto was family like he suspected, and just when he would have to step foot back in that village. It was a month after the departure of Team 7 that a pair of women found their way into the capital of snow. What had once been a country starving under the tyrannical rule of Doto was now a nation in the flower of its youth. Everywhere business and people alike were getting their second wind and headed forwards to help change their nation for the better. The populace was ecstatic at the return of Princess Koyuki, who had decided to stay in her homeland working alongside the Dragon Lord to help the country recover. Though she did not hold the throne, her efforts and work was enough to earn her the respect of not only the people but the Lord himself, who officially recognized her as his second in all matters. I have to say, this place sure is lively, my lady, but do you really think we can persuade this lord to hear us out? Asked Shizune as she pulled her hood back enough to look over at the taller woman beside her. Shizune, we have to make him listen. This may be the only place we can go to protect Kushina and Naruto if things go badly in Konoha. Heck, it may be the only place we can stay safe ourselves. For now let's just find board for the night, replied the blonde as the two turned towards the capital's center. Soon the two were weaving in and out of hundreds of people as they pushed carts laden with furs or tools, as the smells of fruits and spices wafting from other shipments moving away from the docks where even then massive ships were pulling in and out of. As the busy streets continued, the crowd became more and more compact. Just as it became so close that Tsunade feared she may lose sight of her student in the throng. Finally the two emerged into a street where a number of inn-size waved gently in the wind from the nearby port. Finally the promised land is upon us, called Tsunade happily as beside her Shizune let out a small chuckle at her lady's enthusiasm. I suppose so, my lady. Shall we find a place to settle down, or do you wish to find a temple first? To the inn first, Shizune, then we drink to the god of inns. Then we head to the castle and see if this Dragon Lord can do what we need him to, replied the blonde women as the two marched down the street looking for a suitable place to spend their evening. Once the room was set up, Shizune slapping up a few seals they had been given by Jiraiya to make sure that no one could sneak into their room and try and fix them again. Although the pair were now in their right minds, the memories of those seals and just how easily they had been manipulated unnerved the pair more than they truly wished it to admit. Once the room was locked down, and the pair had gotten their bearing, the sun was starting to dip towards the port, the water turning to glass as it reflecting the orange glow of the dying sun. In Tsunade's proud proclamation, the drinking hour was upon them, and for once Shizune couldn't argue with her. Like it or not, the next day could spell either their salvation or another horrible event to add to the collection they seemed to be building. The two soon found themselves seated at a small all-night bar, sitting on small cushions and passing a bottle back and forth as they looked out over the open balcony that showed the capital, its many lanterns turning the area into a sea of stars that mirrored those found in the heavens above. You know, Shizune, I could get used to a view like that, it just looks so peaceful, commented Tsunade as she took a small sip from her dish, offering a warm smile to her apprentice. It really does, it just feels peaceful here for some reason. You noticed the people, they're smiling, all of them, like nothing bad could ever happen to them, like they think this Dragon Lord is always going to be there to protect them, concurred Shizune, taking her own dish in hand. Well, if what Naruto's letter said was true, then it may just be that he is. I mean, dragons? Heck, sounds like something out of a fairy tale. I mean, even Katsuyu's never heard of anything like a dragon contract. What's next, an Oni contract? Chuckled Tsunade. I suppose, Lady Tsunade, how are we going to meet with the Dragon Lord? I mean, we can't just walk in the front door, can we? And it's not like we can just wait to ambush him when he leaves the palace. We have to try, Shizune. We go tomorrow to see if we can get an audience. I'm still a sage. Maybe that will be enough. Heck, maybe if we mention Naruto we can get an invite. She seemed to have gotten chummy with the Lord, finished Tsunade as she set her glass down. Before Shizune to reply to her lady, there was a commotion from the entrance to the bar. As the two turned, they saw a group of 3 men entering, 2 clad in black armor, as a third between them seemed to be draped in some kind of high-class robe. His head bowed so that a mob of blonde hair was the only thing visible. Hey Misha, he did it again, called one of the armored figures as the brown-haired waitress behind the bar, dressed in a simple gray kimono, turned with a small blush on her face before rushing over to check on the man between the pair while giving the armored figures an annoyed glare. And you two just stood there like always, you're supposed to look after him, you're useless, snorted the brunette as she stood up, showing the 3 over to an open booth just on the other side of where Tsunade and Shizune sat. As the pair watched the 2 armored figures plop the third into the booth, each taking station on either side of the blonde, who let out a small groan as he raised a hand up in a fist of seeming triumph. I showed didn't I, Toku? Slurred the blonde as the armored figure beside him nodded his head in a seemingly forced agreement. Yes you did, but honestly, the whole crew. Did you really have to challenge them all? Replied the armored figure as the blonde man, still with his head face down on the table, waved a hand as if brushing away a fly. I never back down from a challenge. Why can't I find my feet? Finished the blonde as the 2 armored figures let out small laughs as the waitress returned, giving the pair an angry scowl before moving over to offer the downed man some kind of foul-smelling drink. You two are lucky he gave me this recipe, or you'd be dealing with explaining to Koyuki how you managed to let him show up in this condition again. Shot the brunette as she straightened up to move away. You say that now, but what about that night during the Dragon Festival that you caught him? I didn't hear you complaining about it then. Called Toku as the woman blushed heavily before deliberately moving away from the 3, suppressing her own smile as she left. As she passed by the 2 medics, Shizune reached over to tug lightly at the woman's sleeve, gaining her attention. Yes, have you 2 finished this bottle? Would you like anything else? Started the woman as Shizune politely shook her head before Tsunade spoke up. No, thanks, we're good for now. We just wanted to know who that was. Sounds like somewhat like a regular here? Asked the blonde as the waitress offered them a smile, looking back at the table behind her. Oh, you two are new to Snow, I should have realized. I suppose he is kind of a regular. Every now and then he goes out and celebrates a little too hard, says it's how he learned to do it from his clan. He is usually fine, but every now and then someone challenges him to a drinking contest and well, chuckled the woman as the figure grasped the bad-smelling cup, pulling it towards him. With a smile, Shizune looked over to her lady, knowing exactly what the waitress was alluding to. Sounds like someone to have fun with. Still must get old, him always losing drinking contests and coming by here plastered. Chuckled Tsunade as she raised the dish to her mouth. Oh no, you misunderstand, he's never lost a drinking contest. He just doesn't know when to stop winning. This time it looks like he challenged a whole shipping crew. replied the waitress as both women looked round at the figure that was rising his face slowly from the table. Well, still he's always ready to act to help us, so I guess letting him have a good time every now and then isn't such a bad thing. Guess the Dragon Clan are just wild by their nature. Finished the waitress as she moved back to the bar. Her words registered with the pair of medics only a moment before the blonde's head rose, showing a mask just like the one Naruto had described covering his face. Well, that was easy, chuckled Tsunade as they moved over to take advantage of their chance to meet the Dragon Lord. As the pair stepped forwards, both guards stood in tandem, turning to put the blonde behind them, both focusing their eyes upon the pair of women, their hands nearing a pair of blades at their hips. Both women raised their hands, a showing of peace as their eyes took in the mix of samurai and chakra armor that the pair were wearing. Though neither wanted to admit it, their own skills would be hard put to punch through such a defense easily. Most of the heavier abilities that could do the job were negated by the chakra armor, and taijutsu and weapons alone would put them on equal terms with a skilled enough samurai. True, they could take the pair, but not without taking some damage themselves. These guards were not something to simply brush aside. Wow, it's okay, we aren't looking to hurt anyone, we just want to talk, spoke Tsunade as beside her Shizune nodded her head in agreement. Indeed, then may I ask what it is you do want? Asked the first armored figure, not taking his hands from the hilts of his blades as his armored helm turned between the pair. We traveled here to Snow to possibly get an audience with the Dragon Lord, and well, he just kind of plopped down in front of us, started Tsunade, noting as she did that this did not seem to put the guards at ease. We are friends of Naruto, and she told us a lot about him, added Shizune as the masked man's head slowly moved out from behind the armored figures, focusing on the pair. Naruto? Well, that's good enough for me, come by tomorrow and we'll talk. Right now I have to find my feet, they're hiding from me again. Finished the blonde with a small giggle as he leaned back behind his guards that finally seemed to relax. This surprised the pair of medics. After all, the Dragon Lord hardly looked in any condition to defend himself, and these two were simply letting him welcome a pair of shinobi into his court without a single word. That was easy. Why are you two so relaxed now? I mean, aren't you a little worried we could mean him harm? Managed Shizune, her own ideas on protecting her lady clashing with the seemingly careless manner in which these guards were behaving. In response, the pair looked at one another before turning to Shizune with a small shrug. You seem to misunderstand, miss. We aren't here to protect our lord. He can do that by himself even now. We are here to make sure he doesn't get carried away. Last time he was out drinking, he ran across a slave ship in our port. And well, he kind of aggressively explained to the crew that there wouldn't be slaves in his land by sinking the ship after he released their cargo. Man, there was a lot of explaining to do with Kumo over that one. Finished the guard that the two women looked between him and the lord who was nursing the drink before him. The next day found Naruto sitting out in the palace gardens watching the small wind blow small trails through the grass and flowers that had grown in the new spring that Koyuki had brought to Snow. Soon the tranquil scene found the soft pad of feet ringing out, announcing the approach of his guests. While he had been quite intoxicated the night before, he had remembered the mention of Naruto, and was more than a little curious as to see what this pair of women had to tell him. Well, at any rate, I can get some more information on Naruto. Heck, maybe I can get some on her mother. If I play this right, I may not have to go through with heading over to Konoha. Still, I guess I'll just have to see what comes next, thought the man as he pushed himself up from the stone bench, turning to see the blonde and dark-haired women being shown into the garden by Toku's armored form. I think the ladies are safe enough from here, Toku. You and the guard are dismissed. Go see if Koyuki needs anything. Last time I saw her, she was looking to move more of Doto's old junk out of the castle. I swear that guy was a pack rat. Finished the blonde as the armored figure bowed his way out, leaving the three alone in the garden. For a time the three just looked at one another before the masked lord finally decided to break the silence. So if I am remembering clearly, you two wished to speak to me. I find myself at a bit of a loss. You know me, but all I know of you is that you somehow know Naruto. Are you friends of hers? Or perhaps her mother's? Asked the masked man as Tsunade turned her brown eyes to look straight into the golden mask. We are old friends of her mother Kushina. We have been out of the village for a long time for reasons we may discuss later. I am Tsunade Senju, and this is my apprentice Shizune, and we have come to discuss a possible trade with you, spoke the blonde woman as Naruto looked between the two. So Naruto's mother is named Kushina. Well, I guess these two may give me some of the answers that I'm looking for after all. As this finished moving through Naruto's mind, he nodded his head slowly at their pair in apparent acknowledgement. It is well to meet you Tsunade and you Shizune. I must say I was not aware of Naruto's mother's name, she seems to keep many things private. You mentioned trade, what would you wish to trade with my kingdom, or myself? Replied the masked man as the pair nodded in understanding. Yes, Naruto does keep things secret. I think once you have heard our story you might just understand why. You see at this time both her and her mother are in danger from Konoha. And anyone who has association with them has been targeted for elimination or altering. Even the two of us. Started Tsunade, noting as she spoke that her words seemed to cause the Dragon Lord some anger. Continue. Naruto spoke through gritted teeth. We and a few others are working to get them out of the village, but we have nowhere to take them that would be safe. Continued Tsunade before Naruto raised a hand to interrupt the woman's words. So you wish to turn to Snow to bring them to for safety, I think I understand, but you must know that Konoha will likely not take such an act lightly. In fact, from what you have told me, if they are willing to do so much to keep the pair, I wouldn't be surprised if they were willing to launch an assault on Snow should they come here. So I'm forced to wonder, just what could you offer that could make this even close to an even trade? Asked Naruto, looking between the women. This was it, this was the moment that would decide if Snow could be their savior. Both knew that what they had to offer was precious little. Heck, they doubted even more if their offer would sound promising since the Dragon Lord beginning remarks. But still, it was all they could do was show their hand and hope for the best. What we have to offer is ourselves. Every shinobi and kunoichi that marches out of Konoha will march into Snow and fight for it. What we offer is the chance for Snow to have their own hidden village. I can tell you that at the least you will have 2 of the sages of Konoha, and even the Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed Fox. Finished Tsunade, expecting the man to consider the woman's words for a time. What she was not expecting was for the masked man to his head to one side in apparent confusion. Interesting, but I am unfamiliar with the sages you speak of and I have no idea what a Jinchuriki is. Replied Naruto as he looked at the now stunned faces of Shizune and Tsunade. What? How could you not know about the sages or Jinchuriki? You hold a summoning contract, surely they taught you about something? Called Tsunade as Naruto simply offer up a shrug. Don't have a clue what a summoning contract is either, so I'm not sure what you are getting at. Still, it hardly matters, you offer your services as well as those of your compatriots against an entire village and a war they might bring down upon Snow. Is that about the long and short of it? Asked the masked man as Tsunade and Shizune looked at one another before nodding. I see, I will have to see what this village of yours does to the pair you wish to protect before I can agree, but you put up your lives, and that I respect. So now the question is just how are you going to get me into Konoha, because I will have to see this truth with my own eyes. Finished Naruto as the pair's faces lit up, his answer giving hope to what they had not dared dream. The pair instantly agreed, Tsunade moving to contact Jiraiya through her summons, as the 3 discussed their plans for Konoha. Naruto the whole time wondering just what he may find when he returned to the village, and just what he would leave standing if what he found there displeased him. By the time that Tsunade and Shizune had managed to reach Snow, the Chunin exams of Konoha were in full swing, the second exam still occurring on this very day, as the genin raced to reach the tower in the center of the forest. As this occurred, Jiraiya found himself leaning upon his familiar perch, the Hokage office window, playing the loyal spy as he worked to steer the man he had once believed to be like a father to him into a trap he and Tsunade had concocted. So this Dragon Lord is holding some kind of legendary summoning contract for the Dragon Tribe. Interesting. And you say he is a new ruler. Might he be interested in forming an alliance with us? Asked the 3rd Hokage, his wrinkled face looking out from under the large 4-pointed hat with the symbol for fire blazing upon it. I don't know about interest, but still it couldn't hurt to at least meet with the man. From what I've seen of Snow, their forces are growing stronger every day. Heck, won't be long till they form their own minor village just to deal with their own actions instead of hiring out, and with the terrain in their favor they make for a powerhouse. Heck, I don't think you could even get an Anbu force into the palace without half the nation spotting you. Chuckled Jiraiya, knowing just the amount of line to let out to let the old man before him hang himself. They are that strong, I suppose getting them as an ally before another nation could prove useful. With Suna slowly slipping in power, it is probably better we move to strengthen our village just in case. You mentioned something about Naruto, correct? Yep, turns out she made an impression on the Dragon Lord. Heck, he seems to be almost relaxed around her. No clue why heck she is still a little firecracker when she wants to be. chuckled Jiraiya as the third gave a small smile. Jiraiya had to force himself to keep the idiotic smile upon his face as he saw that expression upon the wrinkled face before him. You wrinkled bastard, I didn't want to believe it Sarutobi, Kami I didn't but that seal I stuck on the latest copy of my book would have reacted if you were sealed. Heck it would have reacted if any foreign chakra was in you. Damn you so you were in on it. Mark my words you old bastard I will tear you apart with my own hands before I let you use Naruto or anyone else. You already have Naruto's blood on your hands, and I will sell my soul to the Shinigami before I let you hurt one more person. These thoughts blazed behind the fake smile he wore as he continued to work his target into the trap. Anyway sensei I'm off to do some research, take care, called the white-haired man as he leapt from his perch. The third watched the man go turning slowly to look around his office the small smile growing darker as his mind turned to what he had just learned. So Snow had become more powerful than we thought. That matches with what Kakashi reported on this Dragon Lord. His skills put him at cage level if what has been said is to be believed, and from what Jiraiya has said he is too well guarded in Snow to approach, so the answer is to bring him here. He seems to like the fox child for some reason. Now how do I use that? Wait the exams. Of course the fox brat will make it to the finals. She can hardly help it after all the work Jiraiya and Kushina put into her. And an invite to attend such an event would put him inside Konoha. Not bad. I guess it was a good idea to leave Jiraiya to wander. Any seals or mind tricks would have lowered his abilities. And it seems he may have just delivered a Snow. Finished the third as he summoned an Anbu to go and collect a few individuals. It seemed he would be calling a dragon to Konoha. As the old man laughed to himself he never noted the small toad sticking to the outside of the building, or the small puff of chakra as it moved back to Jiraiya informing him that the plan was moving forwards. Sarutobi had called the others involved, and Snow was coming to Konoha, but he wouldn't be coming alone. The second stage of the exams passed with the genin battling in a mixed tournament. Naruto thanks to her strong training overcame Kiba to advance to the next round, the invitation to the Dragon Lord being sent before the judge had even finished the match. Sarutobi was thrilled when the Lord replied stating he would be attending the coming tournament never suspecting that he was being moved into place by his own students. Meanwhile Jiraiya was meeting with Kushina behind the seals of her home. So anyway that's all we have. This Dragon Lord is going to show up at some point, and we have to win him over, so we can hopefully get out of this death trap along with what few people we have managed to short out of the trash. Still this is a long shot. Finished Jiraiya as Kushina nodded her head at the sage's words. So this Dragon Lord is the best chance we have. From what Naruto told us it sounds like we at least have a chance with him. Still what's the plan if he doesn't come through for us? I mean if we put all our forces into this we could be walking into a slaughter. Replied Kushina as Jiraiya nodded in agreement. True, but let's face it Kushina it's not like we have a lot of options here. Look the longer we stay in this village the more danger we are in. Kushina if we don't move soon then whatever few of us there aren't going to be around, it could be you or me that gets sealed next. Heck they could even go for Naruto, we can't stay here. Insisted the man as Kushina let out a heavy sigh. I guess you're right, so when did Tsunade and Shizune say that he would be arriving? Sometime in the next few days, thought they didn't say how he would be. Still I guess we should go and see to Naruko's training she hasn't stopped shouting about pounding that Neji kid for what he did to her friend. Added Jiraiya as he and Kushina moved out of the house and towards a familiar training area. Meanwhile at the border of the land of fire a squad of shinobi was sitting in there came small conversation firing back and forth between them as they idly looked out over the great cavern that acted as the border between their nation and the west. So I heard that the last Uchiha made it to the finals. Should be a good match I hope my shift ends in time to see it. Called one of the group as the others nodded in agreement. Heck what I want to see is that Hyuga prodigy. Did you hear he fights the Jinchuriki girl? Maybe if we're lucky we get to see the little demon get a beating. Chuckled another as a round of similar comments began to pass between the group. Their conversation, however, was brought to a halt as they were suddenly plunged into darkness. The squad swung their heads up blank shock plastered upon each of their faces as they saw the cause of the sudden shade. There a few hundred feet in the air above them was a massive airship. From their position they could see clearly the sheer scope of the flying fortress its bow stretching are like a galleon's offset by the surfaces of massive wings that stretched out on either of its sides. Looking forwards, they could see the ship's front ended in a massive protrusion that seemed ready to pierce the sky itself, while the rear sported a pair of 3 deep swirling blades that cut the air, forcing the behemoth forwards. As if that wasn't enough, what came next caused what few of the guard that had managed to keep from falling into a gaping stance to find themselves transfixed by the sight of 4 massive creatures that flew vanguards to the ship. As the stunned shinobi watched the creatures elegantly arcing over and under the ship, their massive reptilian hides catching the light enough to send flashes down upon the world that they seemed to mock with their flight. The guard was so transfixed by this sight that it wasn't until the procession had passed them by that the first of them began to snap out of their stupor, rushing to send word to Konoha. As the shinobi below scrabbled to send their message, above in the massive airship, Naruto found himself standing on the open viewing area of the flagship, his mask drawn back as he looked out over the land he had so long ago bid farewell to. So I guess I'll be able to see the village soon enough. Still, I never thought I'd actually be returning to that place willingly. From what Tsunade and Shizune said, it sure doesn't seem to have changed much from my time there, still full of fools. The idea of letting Naruto stay in such a place simply doesn't sit well with me, even if she isn't my relative. A place like that could only smother her flame. Her mother Kushina sounds interesting as well, but still there is something those two aren't telling me. Why would Kushina and Naruto be so targeted? What did the village do to them? Still, I suppose if they did blindly trust me with everything, they knew they wouldn't be alive if what they say is true. I suppose I'll just have to find out what I want to know in my own way. Finished the blonde as behind him a voice rang out. As Naruto slipped his mask back down, he turned to see his newest companions looking rather disgruntled. "Oh, there is no way I'm going like this, I can't breathe in this darn body sock," called Tsunade as she marched into the observing deck dressed in the standard chakra armor, the first parts of the metal plating common to the snow guards already in place. Behind her came Shizune, fully decked out in her modified chakra armor, holding the black decorated helm under one arm as she smiled over at her lady. "Tsunade, if we want to sneak in, this is the best way. The Lord was kind enough to loan us this armor," started the dark-haired woman before Tsunade waved off her words. "That's all fine and good, but I can't breathe in this thing," called the blonde, gesturing down to the rather appealing view that the skin-tight chakra armor gave of her form. Naruto turned once again, thankful for his favorite accessory, as despite his best efforts he couldn't help but admire the woman's figure. "Hey, eyes up here, buddy," shouted Tsunade, guessing where the Lord's eyes had been. No, I'm good, but I don't think the armor was meant for such a generous figure as yours. I guess I should make a note of that," chuckled Naruto as Shizune let out a small chuckle at her lady's expense. "If I wasn't afraid it might kill you, and we didn't need you so badly, I swear I would so fling you off this toy ship of yours. Now what are you going to do about this armor, cause if I wear it like this I'm going to pass out before we ever arrive," called the woman. Naruto took a moment to compose himself, and tear his eyes away from the sight before him long enough to consider the blonde's words. "Well, I guess you can go to the armorer and see if he can help you out, otherwise I guess you can just hold your breath," chuckled the masked man as Shizune leapt forwards to hold Tsunade back from jumping the man in front of her. "Thank you, Lord, we'll go and look into that," called Shizune as she pulled her master back slowly out of the observatory. Turning back to the scenery, Naruto couldn't help but grin behind his mask. "Well, that was a fun distraction. Still, back to business, Konoha awaits," muttered the blonde as he saw Barton and his sister's circle once more enjoying the warmth and freedom of the elemental nation skies. A few hours later found Sarutobi along with many of the clan heads moving to the outer walls of Konoha, looking out over the forest surrounding their village, anxiously waiting for the arrival of the Dragon Lord's ship. The border patrol had sent a message via summon alerting him of the rather grand entrance that the Lord seemed to be heading for. So as not to have a town fall into panic, he had called the clan heads together, along with the council, in order to properly greet this newest visitor. A flying ship and dragon sounds like this Lord is trying to give a show of power. Just like any foolish lord, he doesn't understand that power is best when it is unseen. Still, it matters little if he can't be persuaded to see the benefits of an alliance with Konoha. Then I suppose we will just have to take his kingdom from him, thought the wizened man as he looked up at the skies, his eyes scanning back and forth as he waited for a ship to appear on the horizon. After what seemed like a wait that would never come to an end, there was finally movement on the horizon, but not the one he had been expecting. The crowd gathered on the walls looked down at the path leading to Konoha as a small procession of many a half a dozen individuals marched forwards, most clad in a black and gray armor that seemed to shine a darker hue in the light that beat down upon the dust-covered road. As the procession approached, the wind caught a small banner, swinging it round to show the crest of snow waving gently upon what appeared to be some kind of winged creature, forming the Dragon Lord's sigil. "I thought the report said he was arriving in an airship," hissed a Jonin from down the wall as a few other whispers broke out across those arranged on the wall. More than one member of the council was now looking from the procession as he neared the doors to their Hokage, as if confused at this turn of events. Sarutobi looked around as the whispers breaking out, cursing the sudden confusion as he, along with those who recognized the possible embarrassment of not being there to greet the Lord, rushed down to the gate. As he and his fellows reached the gate, they found it already open, with the figure at the head of the procession idly conversing with the gate guards. "Yes, we are the group from Snow, my guards, and I would like passage into your village," spoke the masked lord, as he held out the Hokage's letter to the first of the guards, an unremarkable Chunin who looked from the armored group to the now arriving Hokage as if confused on what he was supposed to be doing. As Sarutobi reached the group, he paused a moment, allowing his old eyes to scan the mix of chakra and samurai armor adorning the four guards that stood behind their lord, pausing at a few bulkier weapons he didn't immediately recognize. However, what truly drew his eye was the young lord that stood before these soldiers. His blonde spiky hair falling around the golden mask that decorated his face seeming oddly at home next to the formal robes he wore, a mix of blue and deep purple that seemed to resemble a mountain at sunset. But the time to consider the man's wardrobe was for later, for now he had to salvage his embarrassment at having to rush to meet the young lord. "Ah, you must be the Dragon Lord," called Sarutobi as the Chunin handed back the letter to the masked man as he turned to face the oncoming Hokage. His guards shifting to look over as well, Sarutobi noting two idly fingering their weapons as they turned eyes upon him. As Naruto found the old man's face, he noted what he could not as a child, that the smile upon the man's face was little more than a mask. One that his a much darker nature, the man's true nature. Idly the boy wondered just what else he would see in this village now that he was no longer an ignorant youth, but such thoughts were for a later time. "I see you must be the Hokage. I must thank you for your invitation to this competition. I am looking forwards to seeing your forces prove themselves in the ring," called Naruto, his voice ringing out in a heavy tone that reminded the Hokage of someone, though at the moment it eluded him. "Yes, well, allow me to welcome you to Konoha. If you would like to, I have called the members of our council for you to meet," continued the man, gesturing to the group that was slowly filing in behind him. As the mix of shinobi and civilians moved in behind the Hokage, Naruto had to fight to suppress a groan. Of course he would present all of his court. He reminds of the thanes back home, always so eager to introduce the court as if they are the ones that we came to see. Still, some of these may be the ones who wish to flee to Snow, may as well take stock of them, concluded Naruto as with a small nod the third gestured the group forwards. What followed was a rather tedious meet and greets that only came to an end when each of the members of both the Shinobi and Civilian Council had received their chance to greet the foreign lord. After what seemed like an eternity, the group from Snow was finally allowed to move into the village, escorted to a small compound set aside for visiting dignitaries. Once the group was safely inside, Shizune and Tsunade along with help from the two other guards moved around, slamming seals into place to disrupt and alert them of any danger. As they worked, Naruto weaved a few simple words around the area to act as a second shield that plunged the compound into darkness from any attempt at spying. When that was finally completed, the group moved into the center of the compound. "So we are welcome to Konoha. I must admit I did enjoy the looks on a few of their faces when we didn't arrive by ship," chuckled Naruto as around him the other gave him small smiles of their own. He may now be of the Dragon Clan, but his pranking nature was something not even Kurai had managed to force out of him, and see all of those civilians and elders tumbling over themselves down the walls to meet him had been a pleasant enough sight for his return. "Yeah, well, it's not like we wanted to leave something like that on the ground for them to sabotage. Toku will be back in Snow to look after Koyuki soon enough, though I don't know how amused she will be when she learns you went on foot as more of a prank than any other reason," chuckled one of the guards as he turned to see Tsunade, having discarded her armor in favor of her usual green garb, entering the room, a small smirk on her face. "Well, now we're here, I guess we make our plans," commented the medic as Shizune moved beside he, still clad in her armor. Unlike her lady, she actually found the armor rather comforting to have, especially considering the area they were currently in. Any advantage she could get, she was intent on taking as long as they were in Konoha. Actually, I think we shall leave that to tomorrow. There isn't much left of this day, and the tournament is still a couple weeks away. Plans can wait for a time. Called Naruto as he idly waved one hand in a lazy fashion. The two kunoichi seemed ready to argue the point, but seemed to decide outwardly disagreeing with the blonde lord to be a bad policy considering what they were asking of him already. So instead the four armored members of the group moved to examine the compound they had, checking for any possible seals they could have overlooked as Tsunade moved to contact Jiraiya through her summons, leaving Naruto to himself. Well, I suppose the safe thing to do would be to lay low and wait to meet with these informants and the rest, still that's not really an option for me. I guess there is nothing for it. Let's see just how much Konoha has changed over the past few years. Muttered the blonde to himself as he pushed himself up, and without informing the rest of his guard moved out of the compound and into Konoha, drawing a few glances thanks to the combination of his formal robes and mask. As Naruto moved through the village, he couldn't help smile at some of the familiar sights. True, he may no longer carry any love for this village, but it had still been his home for a time, and memories had a funny way of surfacing when one revisits a particular place. So as he let his feet guide him forwards through the twists and bends he remembered from his childhood, he allowed his thoughts to wander, until his feet and memories brought him to the last place he could remember seeing when he had lived in the village. The masked man looked up to find himself standing before that same apartment once again. The simple place that had been the catalyst for his journey to Skyrim all those years ago. As he looked at it now, he could not help but feel the same peculiar familiarity with the place, as though some part of him recognized it in a deeper way than simple memory. As he looked over the building, he noted a few differences. For one, the garden and lawn seemed properly tended to now, and he could see at a glance that there was movement through the paned windows, indicating the place was no longer uninhabited. Interesting, so this is a home now. Still this feeling, it's the same as that night, but why? Thought the blonde as he stepped forwards towards the door, looking to put an end to this particular chapter of his life. At the same time, inside the house, Naruto was sitting sprawled on her couch idly chatting with three of her friends. So they are really putting you through the ringer. Man, it must be through. Still, you're the only kunoichi from our village in the exams, you better not lose. Called a platinum blonde dressed in a two-piece purple dress, who turned her blue eyes around at the other girls present as they offered small smiles at her words. "Ya Ino pig is right, I mean, you better show your stuff." Called Sakura as her fellow shot her an annoyed look at the use of that particular nickname. From the couch, Naruto let out a small chuckle as she looked over at the pair. Well, maybe I wouldn't have to hold up the pride of kunoichi alone if you two had trained more before the exam. Chuckled the blonde as the two quibbling girls blushed at her words. From beside them came a small giggle that immediately was silenced as the last member of the group cupped her hands to her mouth, blushing as the rest turned her way. "So sorry," managed the pale-eyed girl as she slid slightly into her oversized cream-colored coat. At her actions, the other three girls let out giggles of their own. "Relax, Hinata, you're fine," called Naruto as the girl nodded form inside her hood. As Naruto looked around at the three, she couldn't help wonder if she might soon be bidding them farewell, or worse. Ino and Sakura she had met early on when she had joined the academy, finding them to be irritating but likable in their own way. After Team 7 had returned from Snow, Sakura had begun to become a bit more manageable, actually putting effort into training, and not simply following Sasuke around like a lost puppy. Ino in the meantime was her usual self, but somehow that worked for her given her team dynamic. The final girl, Hinata, was very different from her fellows. Unlike them, it had taken Naruto over a month to even realize the girl was in her class. She had only noticed the girl when she had been visiting the small grave that Kushina and she had made for Naruto just inside the training forest he had disappeared into. When she had first approached the girl, Hinata had been unwilling to speak at all. After a time she had finally managed to get the truth from the shy girl. It turned out her brother had a secret crush all along. After that, the two had found themselves becoming friends, Naruto helping Hinata to move out of her shell, as the years went on, and Hinata sharing what she knew of Naruto with his family. It seemed that she was the only one who had remembered the blonde boy out of her class for some reason that neither of them could understand. Hinata had only recently recovered from her match with her cousin and was still a bit shaky, but at the moment she was simply happy to be around her friends. So Sakura Naruto, I heard that Dragon Lord you meet is coming to Konoha. I heard he's even supposed to arrive today. Called Ino as she looked around excitedly at the girls. Hey, what's he look like? Is he handsome? Come on, spill. Smiled the blonde as Sakura shrugged in reply. No idea, never took off that freaky mask of his the whole time I saw him. How about you, Naruto? Asked the girl, turning to Naruto, who gave a small grin. Looking for a new mark, Ino? I'm sure Sasuke will be broken-hearted. Chuckled the girl as the girls giggled as Ino blushed before looking closer at Naruto. Hey, you didn't answer, so what did he look like? Continued the girl, but before she could answer there was a small rap at the door that drew the four's attention. They looked around to see Naruto pushing himself up and off the couch, smiling over at Ino as she moved to the front door. Sorry Ino, looks like you won't get your answer. Called Naruto as she moved into the small hall and towards the door. As the three other kunoichi turned back to one another, beginning to start up a conversation, they heard Naruto call out from the front of the house in apparent surprise. Before the three could even hazard a guess as to what had so excited the girl, Naruto came dashing back into the room, a huge grin upon her face. As the three watched, another figures moved in behind her, his formal robes waving gently as he stepped into the room behind the excited girl. Look who I found. Grinned Naruto as Sakura's mouth dropped open in surprise, and Ino and Hinata looked at the masked man before them in obvious confusion. Allow me to present the leader of Snow, the Dragon Lord. Finished Sakura as Naruto rose a hand in a simple wave of greeting. Hello there, he called nonchalantly as the three girls before him looked on in blank shock. While this was occurring back in the Snow Group's compound, things were slightly hectic. What do you mean he's gone? He can't be gone, where would he even go? Called Tsunade as she looked over at the forms of Kushina and Jiraiya, who had just arrived. Shizune in the meantime stepped into the main room, followed by the two armored guards from Snow, neither of which looked particularly bothered by the absence of their lord. We've checked the compound and he's nowhere to be found, he must be out in the village. Called Shizune as the two guards simply shrugged. Look, the lord does not like to be cooped up, he said he would be here to meet tomorrow and that's all there is to it. Called on of the guards as they moved out to find a way to occupy their time. As the two left, Tsunade let out an annoyed cry as Kushina turned to Shizune, decided to let Jiraiya handle his teammate. So the lord ran off, huh? Sounds like quite the reliable guy. Nice new look, by the way, present from a new friend? Chuckled Kushina as Shizune gave her a small smile in reply. Yeah, something like that. Still, from what I've learned about the man, he's good to his word. If he says he'll be back, he will be. Well, good enough for me. Smiled Kushina before stepping forwards to pull the dark-haired women into a tight hug that Shizune returned. It's so good to see you. Managed Kushina as a few cheerful tears dropped from their faces as they embraced for the first time in over 10 years. As the two broke apart, they heard a small cry before Jiraiya flew past them, crashing headfirst into a wall, sliding down it with a groan. The two turned to see a still upset Tsunade muttering darkly to herself. Calm down, I'll show you calm. When I get a hold of that blonde twerp, I'll wring his neck. Her words dying out into a kind of growl as Kushina and Shizune gave the woman a knowing grin. Nice to see you haven't changed either, Tsunade. Chuckled Kushina as the blonde looked over at the two with an annoyed look on her face that dropped as she and Kushina embraced, whispered words passing between the two as they held each other. After a time the women broke apart, small bits of moisture still clinging to their eyes as they did. So you lost your dragon, huh? Nice going, Tsunade. Chuckled Kushina as Tsunade shot her an annoyed look. Yeah, y'all laugh it up. Tsunade replied before her smile dropped as she looked at the woman before her. A woman she thought dead so long ago, lost to her like so many others. The blonde started to speak, but before she could, Kushina raised a hand up to silence her, adding a small shake of her head as she did so. No, Tsunade, you have nothing to apologize for, we were all tricked. Be you, but if I'd stayed, Naruto. Managed the blonde as Kushina shook her head again. There was nothing you could have done, you came back, and look what they did to you. No, the ones who are responsible will be getting what they deserve soon enough. Finished the redhead as Tsunade nodded, looking over to see Jiraiya pulling himself out of the wall with some help from Shizune. That reminds me, hey Jiraiya, did you find anything about Naruto? Called Tsunade as Jiraiya shook his head, trying to get the ringing to stop. Geez Tsunade, you're going to do permanent damage one of these days. muttered the man as the three women smirked idly at his words before Tsunade repeated her question. That, I looked all through Kumo and Kiri before I got word from you about Snow, so far no sign of him. At his words Kushina's demeanor noticeably dropped. She had been praying that Jiraiya would find something on her son, something to turn what was a dream to her into some kind of reality. The sage saw her sadness, feeling his own disappointment in his finds welling up inside of him once again. It's not over, Kushina. There is a lot of the world left to search, and it's probably for the best I didn't find him in Kumo or Kiri. What with the bloodline purges on one side and the bloodline hunters on the other, he may not have been safe there. Continued Jiraiya as Kushina allowed herself a small smile at the man's words. Why, you're right, Jiraiya, we can't lose hope that we'll find him, but first we need to make sure we are here to welcoming him when we do. So what can you two tell me about this Dragon Lord? Asked Kushina as she turned to face the other kunoichi. The two took a small, thoughtful position before replying. Well, he's brash, headstrong, strong as all get out. I mean, he managed to push me back in a spar. Stated Tsunade as Kushina gave the woman a surprised look. Fighting a sage on any kind of footing was almost unheard of, yet this lord had apparently done it. At the same time, he is loved by his people, and he seems to care about them just as much. I guess the biggest thing is he doesn't play games, he's blood with everyone, and looks at actions over words, says he learned it from his clan. Added Shizune as Kushina turned to face her in turn. Sounds a little like Kushina. Chuckled Jiraiya as the two women seemed to consider his words. You know he really does, heck he's even got her sense of humor if you can believe it. Replied Tsunade as Shizune nodded in agreement, Kushina letting out a small bark of laughter at her words. Sounds like we'll get along just fine then. Well, I'm going to head back home. Naruto should have gotten back a bit ago and I want to tell her what's coming. Finished Kushina as she headed out of the compound, leaving the two sages and Shizune to start planning what came next. As Kushina moved back towards her home, she could not know that at that moment that the titular blonde was then sitting on her couch accepting a small cup of tea and being the center of attention from four young kunoichi. So you just stopped her at random? That's so weird. I mean, what are the chances that you just picked my house out of all the places in Konoha? Chuckled Naruto as Naruto let a smile cross his mask-covered face. I suppose so, still at least I have some good company. Dealing with lords and councils can become tiring more quickly than you would believe. Replied Naruto as his eyes slowly moved around the room, falling first on Sakura. As he looked into her eyes, he noted a strength in her that had not once been there for the girl. Well, Sakura, was it? He began, getting a small nod from the pink-haired girl. It seems that you took my words to heart. I am happy to see how much you have grown in such a short time. Finished the blonde, causing Sakura to blush slightly at the man's words. Beside her, Ino looked from Sakura up to the Dragon Lord, chuckling at their interaction. Oh, Sakura, now's who's looking for a new guy. Chuckled Ino as Sakura gave her friend a shove. Meanwhile, the final member of the group was watching the Dragon Lord before deciding to try and take her friend's advice and actually speak up. Excuse me, Lord? Came Hinata's timid voice as Naruto turned his masked fact towards her. She had heard from both Sakura and Naruto how this man had helped them to improve with just one day, and some advice. Maybe, just maybe, he could do the same for her. That, and there was something that was bugging her about this figure that she couldn't quite put her figure on. Yes, I don't believe we have met. You would be? Asked Naruto, looking across at the pale-eyed girl that suddenly looked embarrassed at her own forwardness. I'm Hinata Hyuga, sir, managed the girl before Naruto let out a warm chuckle that caused her to look up. No need to be afraid, Hinata. Here I am, simply a guest of Naruto's home. You may feel free to speak to me as you would anyone else. Continued the blonde as all of those present felt themselves relax a little more. Being so near someone like the Dragon Lord had most of them on edge to begin with, adding in his mask, and it was a miracle that they weren't shivering just from talking to him. I mean, Naruto said you helped her and Sakura, and, well. Hinata started before Naruto raised a hand to interrupt. And you wanted to know if I could help you as well? I suppose that depends, Hinata. From the look of things, you were already injured. Started Naruto as the girl's head dropped slightly as Naruto filled the blonde in on the events of her match with Neji. Once the explanation had passed, Naruto leaned back in his seat before letting out a heavy breath. Well, now that is something. I suppose the first thing to ask Hinata is, what do you want to be? Because I will be honest with you, your demeanor does not suit one of combat. Not everyone is born to fight and kill. It is possible that you will never be a warrior like you want. So answer me this, Hinata, will you fight on even knowing that truth? His words hit Hinata almost like a physical blow, silencing her for a time as her mind raced, showing her flashes of her clan, her family, her lost love, her defeat, and all of the events that coincided with them. After a long pause, Hinata looked up into the blonde's face, her face still trembling, but said despite that fact, I will fight, I don't want to be powerless," replied Hinata as Naruto let out a small happy chuckle. "Well said, Hinata, well said. I think I can see my way to working with you while I am here in Konoha. It is not often to find someone who has something to fight for that would cause them to defy their nature. There is potential in you, just as there is in Sakura, you just have to be strong enough to fight for it." He finished as despite herself Hinata found herself blushing at the older man's words along with Sakura as Ino blinked up at the man starts in her eyes. Hey do me next, what is my potential?" called Ino, completely missing the point of Naruto's words and just wanting to have the Lord praise her in turn. Naruto turned towards his fellow blonde, the leftovers of his last chuckle still fresh on his lips as he looked at the last member of the room. "From your dress and voice I would say an actress, you remind me Princess Koyuki," chuckled the blonde as Ino squealed at what she thought was a compliment, as beside her both Sakura and Naruto giggled, knowing just how the princess and the lord got along. As the excitement died down at last, Naruto turned to the man beside her, recognizing something odd about the situation. "Hey Dragon Lord, why do you still have that mask on? You can't drink with it on," pointed out the girl as Naruto looked up and around the room considering her words. Well, I suppose showing my face isn't that big of a deal. After all, I look little like the child I once was. Besides, it's been so many years I doubt even my old ramen haunt would recognize me," thought the blonde as with a small shrug he reached up to pull the mask, revealing his bright blue reptilian eyes and scaled cheeks to the girls before him. As the mask fell away, the reaction was almost instantaneous. Sakura and Ino both blushed slightly at the man's face, as beside them Hinata turned beet red, her mind showing her training with this blonde-haired blue-eyed man. And as that thought crossed her mind, she found herself thinking back to another blonde. Naruto, in the meantime, having already seen the boy, just shrugged it off as Naruto flashed the group a small smile, his developed canines somehow giving him a sense of wonder. After a time, the group finally departed from the home, leaving Naruto and the Dragon Lord to sit idly chatting in the sitting room. Before too long, there was a noise of the front door opening as the pair of blondes turned toward a voice that rang out. "Naruto, I have some exciting news," called Kushina as she moved into the sitting room, taking a moment to notice those present. "Turns out that Dragon Lord of yours just arrived in Konoha. We're going to go," Kushina continued till she saw the pair before her. As her eyes traveled, they found their way slowly to the blonde figure sitting beside her daughter, now facing her. His blonde spiky hair the same as it had been the last time she had seen it, his eyes the same sapphire blue, and before she could spot herself she cried out in shock and joy. "Minato!" cried the redhead as she sprung forwards, bowling the Dragon Lord off of his seat on the couch and over the back as Naruto watched the pair disappear over the back of the couch with a look of utter shock. From behind the couch there came a small commotion before Kushina looked down at the blonde she had just tackled, through eyes already wet with tears, taking note of the reptilian eyes and the scaled cheeks, her mind slowly snapping back to reality as she recognized that who she had just talked wasn't her lost love, and slowly as the facts started to come back to her, she recognized the markings of this stranger matching what she had learned from the sages. I. She managed as she stood up, taking a few steps back from the blonde, who slowly pushed himself back to his feet, dusting off his cloak as he did. From the couch, Naruto was watching the pair, more than a little puzzled at the scene before her. "I'm sorry, oh Kami, I'm sorry, I didn't, you just..." Kushina began, but Naruto simply shook his head, causing her to stop. He had seen this kind of reaction before, when a spouse had seen a loved one's face thought lost in a bar or in the market. This then must be Kushina, the mother he had learned about. Idly he noted that he must resemble her husband once again, adding to his growing suspicion that he was somehow related to the pair before him. "It is all right, Kushina, there is no need to apologize," spoke the blonde, his words allowing Kushina to calm herself enough to simply look embarrassed by her actions. After a moment she shook herself before speaking up, her usual enthusiasm pushing back what embarrassment she may have held. "Okay, well, good. So you're the Dragon Lord I've heard about. Mind telling me what you're doing in my house with my daughter?" fired the redhead, recovering from her actions faster than Naruto would have thought possible. Naruto couldn't help but allow his face to break into a wide smile at the woman's forwardness. Oh yes, finally someone who understood how to address things. I was simply wandering the village and had a familiar feeling about this home. So I investigated and found Naruto, who was kind enough to welcome me in. Nothing more, I can assure you. I assume from your attitude you are not surprised to see me, so have you greeted my companions? Replied the blonde as Kushina nodded. Yes, I meet with Tsunade and Shizune. Had to say the new outfits were rather entertaining. To which Naruto simply shrugged. They insisted on entering undiscovered. Sometimes the simplest tricks are the best. Besides, cramming Tsunade into one of those armors was an entertaining time in and of itself. My poor armorer had to thin out the armor enough for her to breathe. It was hardly more than paper. His words drawing a chuckle from Kushina, as she could well imagine the reason for the necessary adjustments. I guess it would. Well, Dragon Lord, welcome to my home. Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze at your service. Finished the redhead as Naruto inclined his head to the woman. The pleasure is mine, Kushina. Replied the blonde as Kushina gave him a pointed look. Is something wrong? Asked the blonde as he stood up, looking across at her as Kushina's eyes slowly examined the man before her. Her first instance may have been because of Minato, but now she was noticing more and more the small similarities the man before her shared with herself. Odd things like the shape of his face, or the grin he gave her. Sure, features were different, but still the similarities were there nonetheless. No, but you haven't given us your name, Lord. It seems only polite, as you are a guest in our home. Replied the redhead, deciding to throw caution to the winds and just force the question out into the open. Naruto for his part was thinking much along the same lines. Well, I suppose there is nothing for it. At worst they are not blood of mine, and I look at this as it stands, still family. If they were real, why was I alone? I need answers. A question first, Kushina. I have been told a great many reasons for you and Naruto to mistrust this village, but I don't believe I have heard the true reason. Neither Tsunade nor Shizune would speak to me on this, and even Naruto guards the truth close to her. My name is such a truth. And if you wish it, then I want to know why I am truly here? Finished the blonde as Kushina's face took on a saddened expression. Fair enough, Lord. The reason my daughter and I hate this village is because it robbed me of my son and would have taken my daughter if not for Jiraiya. Started Kushina as she laid out her and Naruto's situation, explaining her own place as well as Naruto's, referring to the loss of her son and everything else, as Naruto's heart skipped a beat as the pieces of his own life fell into place, his mind filling in the gaps as the story continued. As Kushina reached the end, there was only one question left. What was your son's name? Asked the Dragon Lord as Naruto moved over to stand beside her mother, both looking at the man before them with a heavy sadness weighing down on them. His name was Naruto Uzumaki. Kushina answered. As the words fell from her lips, Naruto couldn't help but freeze. So that was it, all of it, the beatings, the names, the suffering, why he had been alone, and the truth. The overwhelming truth that the two before him were willing to die not simply for themselves but to avenge his loss. And finally the last fact, these two before him were his family. So, what is your name? Asked Kushina as she looked up to see the blonde looking at the pair with small flecks of moisture already building in both of his eyes. The pair noticed this, but before they could speak the man beat them to it. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I was driven from Konoha when I stopped to look at this home when I was 8. I ran into the forest and fell into a shrine that held this mask. I have spent the last 11 years of my life in the land of Skyrim, and I have come home. Spoke the man slowly as the pair of Kunoichi's eyes widened at his words. There was a small pause as before, as one twin blurs of red and yellow rocketed forwards, and for the second time that night Naruto found himself taken to the ground as the pair of Uzumaki women cried tears of joy as Naruto cried out in turn, taking the pair in his arms as hot tears crashed down his cheeks in turn. Soon Konoha would pay the price for their actions. Soon all debts would be paid. But for this one night the Uzumaki family simply reveled in being a family for the first time since the day of their birth. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.